Chapter 212. Although they managed to solve the problem with the church in the end, this incident made the Finns realize once again that the Demon King's army was making a comeback. It would be difficult for them to stay out of it. After they finally brought the still unconscious Irene home, Su Xinxing and the rest discovered that I Ching and the other current heroes had mysteriously disappeared. Only a strange-looking mechanical parrot was left in the house. It's a familiar, and a rare origin familiar at that. As the Demon King, Elena only needed a glance to recognize the mechanical parrot's true form. If that girl really did learn magic by herself for less than a week like you said, then I can't help but be surprised by her magical talent. Wasn't this nonsense? It would be abnormal if the protagonist who transmigrated didn't have a protagonist's aura or some sort of cheat. Su Xinxing was not moved by this at all. He even wanted to laugh. Lin Xianxian might have given the familiar some instructions before she left. Anyway, when they returned to the house, the parrot opened its beak and began to recite I Ching's message in a shrill voice like a recorder. According to the message, I Ching and the rest wanted to go to the church with Su Xinxing and the rest to rescue Irene. However, due to their short legs, Su Xinxing and the rest disappeared with a whoosh. The current heroes who did not know the way could only obediently return to the house and wait for news. However, they did not receive any news from Su Xinxing and the rest. Instead, they received other news. The Demon King's army led by one of the 4 legendary generals, the Burning Blood warrior Soraya, had launched a surprise attack on the Silverbeak Fortress, which was the throat of the Frost Eagle Empire. They had caught the human army off guard and forced them to retreat. They had even pushed the human army to the Green Plains 300 miles away from the capital. The king of the Frost Eagle Empire was already very old. When he heard the news, he almost vomited blood and died. In the end, it was the eldest princess who led the imperial capital's royal knights into the Emerald Plains to stop the advance of the Demon King's army. However, because of this, the Emerald Plains, which was originally known for its beautiful grassland scenery, was completely dyed red by the blood on both sides. It was an out-and-out meat grinder. However, in this kind of high magic world, if the gap between the top combat power was too great, even if one side had the advantage in terms of military strength, it was very easy for the morale to be shaken due to the death of the main general, resulting in a collapse. Although the Princess Royal was quite skilled in magic, she wasn't a match for Soraya, one of the 4 legendary generals. The only reason she was able to hold her ground was because the Frost Eagle Empire's army had the buff to fight with their backs to the wall. No matter what, the Frost Eagle Empire's capital was behind them. If it was breached, the consequences would be unimaginable. However, the ancestors of the Celestial Empire had long said that the morale of the human side would gradually disappear along with the defeat of the Demon King's army. At that time, the future of the Frost Eagle Empire would be set aside for the time being. However, the Princess Royal would probably either be captured, die in battle, or commit suicide. As a hero summoned to this world by the Princess Royal, I Ching naturally could not ignore this matter. Therefore, she decided to go to the Emerald Green Field with Lin Qian and Xia Shuiyao. As long as the 3 of them were there, the high-end combat power of the human army would be at least on par with the Demon King's army. The morale of the human side would also be maintained for a longer period of time. Moreover, Lin Qian and Xia Shuiyao were both mages, and mages were recognized as great killing machines in war. Only in a war at the level of an army would their power shine brightly. What a naive brat! Do they really think that the cunning princess will go head-to-head with the Demon King's army? Finn sighed. And they underestimate war too much. I hope they don't die on the battlefield because of some accidents. As a former prince of the kingdom, Finn had seen many geniuses in the era when he fought against the Demon King's army. Although there was still a gap between them and the three current heroes, they were indeed geniuses. However, nearly 90% of them died on the battlefield. It was clear that power was not enough to dominate the battlefield. This was especially true for mages with frail bodies. Sometimes, just an arrow mixed with magic-resistant metal could take the life of a famous court mage. It's fine. It's good to let them train. Otherwise, if they follow us all the time, they won't feel like heroes at all. If they die so easily, it means they don't have the protagonist aura. Su Xinxing did not seem to care. And compared to getting involved in that kind of war, it's easier for us to directly deal with the source of the problem. His meaning was clear. He wanted to directly find the Demon King and persuade him to surrender. If he could not persuade him to surrender, he would directly kill him. It was simple and clear. Elena also knew some of the glorious and not so glorious history of this true hero. Naturally, she would not talk to Su Xinxing about the human rights of the demon race at this time. Pharsalus knew that he was dreaming. In his dream, he seemed to have returned to a year ago. 15 years ago, the Demon King led them to surrender to the hero at that time and promised to live honestly as humans. Even as one of the 4 legendary generals, Pharsalus of Steel Jade, he did not raise any objections. Instead, he integrated into human society with many other high-level demons who could take on human form. However, he was neither like the warlike Soraya, who used her military exploits to gain a position in the human army and stirred up trouble all day long, causing all kinds of civil wars in the past 15 years. He was also not like Boyant of Shinrui, who used his intelligence to make a name for himself in the human army and became famous all over the world. He only pretended to be an honest farmer who only cared about and took care of his own land. Even though he followed the Demon King's orders, due to his pride as a demon, he still subconsciously treated humans as inferior creatures and did not intend to have any interactions with them. Until he met the person in his life. Even to this day, he still couldn't forget how she had secretly climbed up the wall of his house to pick a bunch of grapes. When she was finally discovered, she had straddled the wall and revealed a shy yet sly sweet smile. After that, he began to try to get in touch with her and used this as an opportunity to get in touch with other humans. In the end, he gradually integrated into the human world. A few years later, they had the fruit of their love and he confessed his identity as a demon to her. However, the anger and disdain he imagined did not come. She was magnanimous and forgave and accepted Pharsalus' lies and true identity. This made Pharsalus decide to live like a real human and spend the rest of his life with her, who he loved deeply. However, the peaceful days were broken by an accident. It was the autumn harvest time. The surrounding tenant farmers were harvesting crops in his fields to exchange for food for the winter. Influenced by her love for humanity, Pharsalus set a very low amount of food for the tenant farmers. He was a well-known philanthropist in the surrounding area. Because of this, all the tenant farmers had a good relationship with Pharsalus. But just as the work was in full swing, a magical creature attracted by the smell of food appeared at the edge of the farm, scaring most of the sharecroppers to the ground. Just as one of them was about to be eaten, Pharsalus bravely stepped forward and shouted at the demon to retreat. After that, Pharsalus felt that although he did not use any magic and did not reveal his identity, it was still inappropriate to reveal some of his strength. This made most of the tenant farmers look at him strangely. So to avoid trouble, he planned to leave with his wife and daughter and start a new life in a place where no one knew them. But it was too late. When he returned home, packed his luggage and was about to leave with his wife and daughter, he found his house surrounded. Hundreds of church members were staring at them with all kinds of anti-magic weapons. From the leading bishop, Pharsalus learned that it was all because of the tenant he saved. When he learned that the tenant farmer betrayed him without hesitation for a few grains of silver barley from the church, the former demon general felt unprecedentedly disappointed in humans. During the confrontation with the church, a young missionary could not bear the pressure and accidentally shot an arrow at Pharsalus' child. Pharsalus' wife instinctively shielded her daughter. In the end, both of them died in a few seconds from the poison smeared on the arrowhead. The happiness that Pharsalus had spent 15 years to find was all destroyed in a few seconds. "You damned humans!" "Ah!" Pharsalus cried out in grief as tears of blood flowed down his face. When he came back to his senses, all of the church members who surrounded him had turned into minced meat in the forest. After that, he rushed over and killed all the tenant farmers. Then, under the persuasion of one of the 4 legendary generals, Buoyant of Shinrue, he inherited the position of the Demon King. He once again gathered the demons who were dissatisfied with the humans and once again formed the Demon King's army, declaring war on all the humans. "Since you dare to spy on my dream, then just show yourself." Pharsalus opened his eyes on the Demon King's throne and looked at the empty hall. He suppressed his anger and said in a deep voice, "I will let you know how great of a sin it is to mess with the dream of a high-ranked demon." The scene in the middle of the hall distorted, and then 2 people and a cat appeared there. "Pharsalus, I didn't think that the person who would take this step would be you." Elena looked at Pharsalus, who had changed back to his original demon form. His entire body was indigo, and he still had fangs and a hyena tail. She was in disbelief. "I always thought that the honest and honest you would not do such a thing." "Lord Demon King." Pharsalus looked at Elena as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he shook his head. "After you surrendered to the humans, there is nothing more to say between us. If you are here to persuade me to surrender again, then there is no need. This time, even if I die, I will die on the battlefield against the humans." Chapter 213. "Well, I have an idea." Su Shinxing, who was lying on the side, wagged his tail and raised his hand to ask, "Do you have anything to say, sir?" Elena, who was already troubled by Pharsalus' tough attitude, immediately followed Su Shinxing's lead. "Don't you think the situation in this guy's dream is familiar?" Su Shinxing asked Elena and the others as he sat on Pharsalus' back and pointed at the roaring demons below with his claws. Despite being one of the 4 legendary generals, Pharsalus' strength was outstanding. With the name, Pharsalus the Steel Jade, he had almost unlimited physical strength. In the last war between the Demon King's army and the humans 15 years ago, in order to buy time for the Demon King's army, he single-handedly moved 3 mountains to the plains on the path of the human army. This delayed the human army's advance by more than half a day. If it weren't for the fact that the human army had magicians who could use wind magic to speed up their advance, the delay would have been doubled. Pharsalus' skin was also very tough. So far, other than Finn's Sword of the King, there was no other weapon in this world that could hurt him in his true form. What? Su Shinxing's holy sword of the end, Rolander? If Su Shinxing really pulled that thing out, the already fragile lattice world would also be half destroyed, okay? Even if he encountered another one of the 4 legendary generals, the battle maniac Soroya, Pharsalus would still win. It could even be said that in the entire Demon King's army, there was no one who could beat Falsalits in physical strength. It was no wonder that Boyant of Shinrue, who was known for his wisdom, would let Falsalits take over as the new Demon King after Alina, the former Demon King, left. Of course, it was useless. Finn and the others were too slow, so Su Xinxing simply clawed Falsalits to the ground. Falsalits was still struggling, but when Su Xinxing sat on his back, he was surprised to find that no matter how hard he struggled, he could not get rid of the tiny black cat on his back. It would have been fine if that was all, but the thing was, for some reason, this guy was heavier than a mountain. Falsalits tried his best to bend his spine, but he could not even lift himself up. Are you saying that it's similar to the situation in Vincent's church? Finn asked thoughtfully. Indeed, although the church had been working hard to hunt down the remnants of the Demon King's army and various demons after its revival, until more than a year ago, the church's actions were still considered stable and orderly. Both the incident in St. Vincent's Church and the situation in Falsalits were abnormal. The church's reaction was too extreme. Didn't Alina capture the soul of the bishop and interrogate it? She said that a higher demon had turned him into a demon, hinting and tacitly allowing him to do such a thing. If you think about it carefully, don't you think that such actions are forcing the powerful demons to become enemies with humans? Su Xinxing nodded. He did not intend to beat around the bush, and directly said what he thought. If there were members of the church that this fa something met who had been instigated by that superior demon, it would make sense for him to act so aggressively. Alina seemed to want to argue for the demons, but in the end, she gave up and went into deep thought. Seeing this, Su Xinxing slapped away Falsalits' hand, which had almost grabbed his tail, and continued speaking. Then here comes the question. Learning excavation magic. Bah, who is that, higher demon? But when we interrogated that fellow's soul, according to his description of the higher demon's appearance, there were no obvious characteristics. To most humans, the higher demons looked the same in their true form. It was just like how most people in the Celestial Empire thought that black people looked the same. Only demons like Falsalits, whose body had undergone specialization due to excessive power, would have obvious characteristics. Therefore, the information obtained from the bishop's soul was useless. Alina was a little confused. Su Xinxing was present at the time, and should have known this very well. Appearance is often the most unreliable reference standard, Su Xinxing snorted. Don't forget, I was still a human when I came to this world last time. This example was so convincing that Mr. and Mrs. Finn were speechless. Speaking of which, how did you become like this? Although they were all very curious about this, they were all very wise and didn't touch this bad luck. What's more, if I'm not mistaken, most higher demons like to show off their personal bravery by putting some unique symbols on their bodies, right? Su Xinxing continued. Just like the lighthouse country on Earth, the great demonic realm was a place where individual heroism was highly advocated. Therefore, many demons liked to make themselves non-mainstream. Su Xinxing had even seen a demon poke a dozen things like Tian-10 fried dough twists on his body. In this way, the lack of characteristics is even more suspicious, isn't it? It's almost like someone is secretly promoting the reorganization of the Demon King's army. Finn's face had become very serious as he followed Su Xinxing's words. Originally, if the two races had friction for various reasons and ended up in a war, there would be nothing that could be done. If it weren't for Su Xinxing's arrival this time, even as a hero, he wouldn't have participated too much except to help when the humans were at a disadvantage. But if this kind of friction and war were caused by someone, then as a former member of the Salvation team, even if it was just to maintain world peace, he would definitely take action and kill the guy who wanted to make a big news. Then, Your Excellency, who do you think would do such a thing? Finn asked hurriedly. I don't know. Su Xinxing's straightforward answer almost made the Demon King and his wife knock their heads on the floor. Fortunately, he had no intention of making fun of them. But I think there are two possible culprits. The first is the person who benefits the most from this incident, and the second is the person who can't wait to push the situation further. Finn and Alina looked at each other, and then said the same name in unison, after torturing Su Xinxing, Buoyant. Chapter 214. Indeed, if one thought about it carefully, Buoyant's actions in persuading Falsarits to ascend to the Demon King's throne were indeed very suspicious. As one of the few demons who had made a name for themselves in the human circle of power, his enthusiasm for reorganizing the Demon King's army was extremely suspicious. Although Su Xinxing had never met Buoyant of Xinrui, who was also one of the 4 legendary generals, after returning to this world, he had fought with him more than once in a battle of wits and courage with the Demon King's army 15 years ago. Of course, the battle here was more of a battle of wits and courage rather than a confrontation. Otherwise, Su Xinxing would have slashed the other party in half, and there wouldn't have been so much trouble. Even 15 years ago, Su Xinxing's strength wasn't as strong as it was now. He was only strong in the general sense. But even so, if it was a one-on-one, no, even if it was a 1-on-3 situation, it wouldn't be difficult for him to kill Buoyant. Although Buoyant, Falsarits, and Soraya were all 4 legendary generals, he was the weakest in terms of individual strength. As a rare 2-headed demon, Buoyant only had a certain level of attainment in mental power and runology. The real reason why he could be listed as one of the 4 legendary generals was simply because he was one of the few wise men in the Demon King's army. He had always played the role of a think tank in the Demon King's army. Of course, it could also be said that he was the Demon King's advisor at that time. To be honest, that guy did have some tricks up his sleeves. Back then, Su Xinxing's mortal wisdom was not enough to play with him. If not for the existence of the wise men in the hero's army who could see through some of his schemes in the early stages, and Su Xinxing could not be bothered with the other party's schemes in the later stages and relied on his strength to forcefully defeat all of that guy's schemes, it would have been quite troublesome. It was precisely because the group had displayed their strength that Demon King Alina came to the conclusion that they were no match for the Salvation Army and took the initiative to surrender to avoid the worst situation. But in this way, the demons who harbored malice against the humans were also saved, which led to the current situation. Yes, Soraya of Burning Blood, Farsalits of Steel Jade, and Buoyanti of Xinrui. Su Xinxing counted with his claws. Wait, why are there only 3 of the 4 legendary generals? Speaking of which, when we fought our way to the Demon King's city, we only met 3 demon generals. I always thought that the 4th demon general would be the strongest of the Demon King's army and stay in the Demon King's city. In the end, after breaking through the Hellcrown's guards and mechanisms, I met Alina directly. Even Finn hammered his palm with a look of realization on his face. I say, you've been living with the Demon King for 15 years, but you haven't found this strange? Su Xinxing looked dispiritedly at the confused Finn. The 4th Infernal General is called Invisible Sixth. His ability is biased towards information gathering, which is equivalent to having an unlimited amount of invisibility. However, he has almost no combat ability, and because of that, he almost never comes into contact with invisibility. It's normal that you haven't seen him before. Even the last time I saw his true form was nearly 20 years ago. Back then, he was the one who grasped all of your movements. Elena explained to Su Xinxing in detail. Finn suddenly felt like there was an old curse stuck in his throat, but he couldn't spit it out. In short, the most important thing now is to find Boyanti, right? Finn asked Su Xinxing, who was licking his fur like a cat, after glancing at Farsalets, who seemed to have no intention of continuing to struggle on the ground. That's the problem. It's very difficult to find that guy. I remember 15 years ago, he was always hiding in a safe place like a tortoise. It's very difficult to catch him. Su Xinxing sighed helplessly. He really wished that his old think tank could appear by his side. If that guy was here, he might be able to catch Boyante's slip. Not to mention that we're in the open while that guy is in the dark. If it really doesn't work, I'll have to step in and destroy the Demon King's main force. Since that guy spent so much effort to reorganize the Demon King's army, he'll definitely jump out when the Demon King's army shows signs of falling apart. In the end, Su Xinxing could only think of this simple and crude method. But in many cases, the simpler the method, the more miraculous the results. If you really do that, it'll give me a headache. Apart from the 3 people, 2 humans, 1 cat, and Farsalets, who was lying on the ground, a young man's voice rang out in the empty hall. Unlike Finn's simple and honest voice, which was full of a sense of justice, this slightly shrill voice gave off a creepy and slippery feeling. Oh, our Xinrui is finally willing to show himself. Su Xinxing narrowed his cat eyes and stared at the position beside the Demon King's throne. Even if the other party had used some special method to make their voices come from all directions, this little trick was of limited use to Su Xinxing. He immediately discovered the location of the other party's true body. That guy is actually here. TSK, but as the think tank, it's normal for him to appear beside the Demon King. Finn drew his long sword from his waist. It was obvious that he didn't have a good impression of Boyanti. Moreover, that guy was suspected to be the mastermind behind the kidnapping of Finn's daughter. It was no wonder that the usually nice Finn would be so serious. Long time no see, Lord Demon King, and the 2 of you who used to be heroes. Boyanti seemed to have recognized Su Xinxing's true identity from the conversation just now. So when he revealed himself beside the throne, he greeted the 3 people with human noble etiquette. Unlike Farsalets, Boyanti still appeared in human form. His human appearance was that of a handsome man with short white hair and squinted eyes. He looked to be around 30 years old, and his body was thinner than Finn's, but his face was more handsome than Finn's. So, Boyant, do you have anything you want to say? Elena looked at her former subordinate and asked straightforwardly. 15 years ago, I always thought that wisdom could defeat power. Boyanti didn't seem to understand the hidden meaning in Elena's words. He actually started talking to himself, until you appeared, my lord. He stared at Su Xinxing, but because his eyes were squinted, Su Xinxing couldn't tell what his gaze meant. You used pure strength to crush all my plans. You led public opinion to make the ignorant people suspicious of you, sowed discord and caused the human authorities to secretly persecute you, and meticulously planned countless traps on the battlefield. You didn't hesitate at all, and you didn't even have the slightest bit of confusion. That way of crushing everything with absolute power made me realize for the first time that when power reaches a certain level, it is difficult to resist with pure wisdom. Boyante's words seemed to be filled with admiration and longing for Su Shenxing's time is of the essence, attack first, talk later, style. At the same time, I finally understood that if I want to achieve my goals, I need more power. This is the main reason why I hid my identity among the humans for so long and quietly operated everything. Are you planning to use this long speech to stall for time? Finn asked coldly. More or less. Of course, if you want to fight now, I'm more than happy to oblige. Boyante admitted without hesitation. That fearless attitude made the former Demon King Alina frown. What are you planning? Don't rush, listen to me slowly. Boyante's lips curled up, as if he was enjoying the current situation. Su Shenxing looked at all of this without commenting. After all, according to various ACGN laws, 99% of the villains would be overturned by the protagonist after the narration, no matter how strong and powerful they were. Then, to achieve my ambition of reconquering this world and using it as a base to rebuild the great demonic realm, what level of power do I need? Because there aren't many known conditions, the answer is a bit general. But to put it simply, power that won't be defeated by the heroes. Since the former Demon King Alina wasn't a match for the heroes, then I just need to obtain power that surpasses Alina's. So, I rebuilt the church. What? Finn was shocked. The church was rebuilt by a demon? This is too much of a joke, are you surprised? But I found some very interesting things in the old church's records. For example, a method to increase one's own power through the faith of believers. Boyante shrugged, and then his gaze fell on Su Shenxing again. Of course, this level of power can't defeat the heroes. At least, it can't defeat you at that time. So, I took control of some abject demons and demi-humans, and let them start to selectively breed demons. Alina's face was a little gloomy. Do you remember now, my dear Demon King? Although your main subordinates were demons like us, when you first conquered this world and made it into a decoration of the great demonic realm, you relied on an army of 100,000 demons from the great demonic realm. That's right. What's surprising is that the Demon King who seems to have terrifying magic power is actually just a harmless summoner. Your terrifying magic power should have been gathered from the demons under the feedback of the magic contract, right? After all, even if 100,000 demons are low-level demons, 1% of each feedback is enough for a person to have the strongest magic power in this low-level world. Boyante laughed out loud. It's just that you've laughably released those 100,000 ancestral demons into the wild, but I've sent people to capture most of them and set up a demon breeding ground deep in the mountains and forests. As for food for the demons, human rights are really a good thing. With rights, no one would care about where the slaves I bought and the lowlifes who went missing in my domain went. Finn and Alina looked at the lunatic Boyante with unfriendly gazes. Don't look at me like that. Haven't I said it before? The current me is completely different from before. Under my command, there are 1,000,000 demons. My power is already 10 times yours, Demon King. And now those 1,000,000 demons are rushing to the battlefield. TSK, it just so happens that I'm running out of things to feed them. This war is really too timely. After all, the battlefield lacks everything except corpses, right? It was then that Su Shenxing stood up as if he had just woken up, shaking the fur on his body. Finn, you two have no problem dealing with this lunatic, right? He asked the couple. I'll take care of the battlefield. Don't worry, leave it to us. Finn and Alina looked at each other, and then smiled confidently and nodded at Su Shenxing. Seeing that, Su Xingxing did not bother to continue talking nonsense with the lunatic, and ran towards the battlefield. Hey, didn't you hear me? That's 1,000,000 demons. And those ancestral demons have all been killed by me. You have no chance of winning. Seeing Su Xingxing's calm and unhurried manner, Boyanti could not help but become angry and roared at them. And you too, do you still think you can beat me? Right now, I have the mana of 1,000,000 demons feedback. Although I don't know how strong the magic power of 1,000,000 demons is, I'm still a little disappointed. I thought you would be smarter if it was you, but I didn't expect you to be no different from that stupid bishop from before. Elena smiled coldly, and her casual mockery had the demeanor of a big sister. What? Boyanti was furious. When did you have the misconception that those bastards in the great demonic realm would let a summoner with no combat power conquer this world as the Demon King? And when did you have the misconception that the demons of the great demonic realm would obediently listen to a weakling? Elena continued. Boyanti suddenly realized that he seemed to have made a mistake. Yes, the demons of the great demonic realm were not kind creatures. Even if they were tamed, they would still bite their masters when given the chance. But the former Demon King had never encountered such a situation. Or rather, those demons were a little too obedient. Pure black magic power emerged from Elena's body again, but this time it was thicker and darker than before. There's only one answer, those 100,000 demons were all subdued by my strength. And I've never signed any contract with any of them, because there's no benefit except polluting my magic power. In other words, I'm much stronger than those 100,000 demons put together. Not only that, that lord is stronger than me. A mere 1,000,000 demons. Ha, your ambition has gone in the wrong direction from the beginning. Chapter 2:15. The battle was soon over. There was no dazzling collision of magic, no splattering of blood. With a single blow, Elena had eliminated Boyant, who had once bowed before her and now intended to rule the world. I thought it would be more troublesome. Finn sighed. This guy was much smarter than he is now. 15 years ago, in the war between the Demon King's army and the Human Alliance, the Demon King's army was not only far superior to the Human Alliance in terms of raw power, but also saw through almost all of the Human Alliance's tactics and strategies. The Demon King's army then devised a counterattack, causing the Human Alliance to suffer a crushing defeat and the entire world to fall under the Demon King's army's rule. It was precisely because of this that this world was made into a treasure that had both the functions of art and energy, displayed in the great demonic realm's exhibition hall. If Su Xingxing and his party had not suddenly come to this world, perhaps the Human Alliance would still be living under the shadow of the Demon King's army. Although the mana that the monsters fed back to him has indeed increased his power, but even if they are descendants, the ancestors of those monsters are still creatures from the great demonic realm. Elena had her own opinion on this. Almost all the creatures in the great demonic realm have a mad and barbaric nature. It would have been fine if it was just one or two, but he had gathered the mana of millions of monsters. The mana of these creatures would naturally affect him, causing him to gradually become mad. The former Demon King looked a little regretful. If he didn't have such a crazy idea and simply used his extraordinary wisdom and some little tricks that the Human Alliance could not recognize, he might have been able to unify the continents that had been incessantly warring since ancient times and rule this world as a human. It's all in the past now. Finn patted his beloved wife's shoulder and comforted her gently. Now we just have to rely on His Excellency. It will get better in the future. Even if any of the millions of monsters were no match for the two of them, but if so many monsters appeared at once, even the Demon King and his wife would need a considerable amount of time to deal with them. During this time, the civilians on the Human Alliance's side would probably be greatly harmed. But if it was Su Xingxing who came, then there was nothing to worry about. Although the two of them did not know how Su Xingxing planned to deal with the monsters that could be killed in a row, it did not hinder their trust in Su Xingxing, the former savior. I hope so. Also, I feel like we've forgotten something. Elena did not dwell on this point, but instead rested her chin on her hand and thought. Now that you mention it, I feel the same. Finn paused, and then frowned. I'm glad that you both remember. A deep voice came from beneath their feet. But can you get off me first before you continue with your lovey-dovey display? So you are still here, Farsalets. So, do you intend to continue to fight with the humans? Finn put away his joking expression and asked seriously, what do you think? I will let go of my hatred and live among the humans again. Although I really want to say that, I'm sorry. Even if I know that this is all Boyan's scheme, I can't let it go. After all, the ones who killed my wife and daughter are indeed humans. Farsai stood up and patted the dust off his armor as he answered in a muffled voice. It seems that the truth of the matter made him feel terrible. After all, not only were his wife and daughter abandoned, even he himself was fooled, and was actually working for the culprit who caused all this. I can promise that I will try my best not to attack humans without being angered by them, but I really can't do it if you want me to live among humans again. After this, I will probably find a random mountain and live in seclusion with the wild beasts. Thanks, you've helped a lot. Finn knew that it was impossible for a person to let go of their hatred so easily, so he did not force it. He just felt a little regretful. If you need anything in the future, you can come find us at the place where Elena and I live in seclusion. Then that's it. Take care. Falcerus hesitated for a moment, but he did not greet Elena. He spread his demonic wings and flapped them, creating a rather comical human-shaped hole in the ceiling of the palace. He flew out in an instant. This way, as long as they could heavily injure or capture Soroya in the battle on the Emerald Plains, the Demon King's army would once again be without a leader, and the Human Alliance would win again. Is this really okay? Elena asked softly. It was not clear if she was talking to Finn or herself. Back then, I abandoned all the demons so easily and let them live in pain. I was the only one who lived happily. And this time, is the situation going to repeat itself? You've already done your best. Finn did not know how to persuade her, so he could only try to comfort her. At most, the situation will return to how it was before. In fact, the demons might have a harder time in the future. After all, after this war, even the humans who believed in the demons would definitely be shaken. After this, the demons might really become rats that everyone wanted to kill. The higher demons who could transform into humans were still fine, but the lower demons who had some non-human characteristics and could not be concealed with magic would probably be more miserable. Finn knew all this, but he would not say it out loud. Other than making his wife feel uncomfortable, there was no other use. Urgent military report. In the Emerald Plains, in the tent that was temporarily used as the headquarters of the Human Alliance, a messenger did not even wait to report and hurriedly ran in from outside. In the end, he was stopped by the guards. Although the Human Alliance's battle had become much easier after the arrival of the three heroes, and their disadvantage had been slightly reversed, the Demon King's army was still not to be underestimated. Therefore, there were battle meetings held almost every day. Although I Ching, as a hero, would also attend these meetings, he was either in a dazed or drowsy state. After all, he did not know anything about military matters. However, the military report this time gave him a fright. According to the messenger's report, at the southern edge of the battlefield, there was a large group of demons rushing towards the human camp. The human outposts in that direction were almost completely wiped out. If they were allowed to enter the battlefield, then the human side's defeat and the fall of the empire would only be a matter of time. Mr. I Ching, the eldest princess, looked at I Ching with some hesitation. She seemed to want his help, but this mission was too dangerous. It was tantamount to suicide, so she was too embarrassed to ask. Understood. I Ching did not hesitate at all. I will try my best to block them for a while. During this time, I asked the eldest princess to retreat. After saying that, he picked up his weapon and led the two transmigrator girls who insisted on going with him to the south of the battlefield. Chapter 2:16. The southern part of the emerald green plains used to be a dense forest. The reason why there was the word used to was because a few minutes ago, there was less than a tenth of the forest left and the rest had been turned into a wasteland. Millions of demons had just passed by and they had destroyed everything that stood in their way, including the trees, the rocks, and the creatures in the forest. Some monsters, such as the lava boar and the swamp scale snake, which were covered in flames, acid, and venom, would even leave a trail of death on the ground that was covered in flames or poisonous gas. Just like on the African savanna, even the most powerful lion was just a chicken in front of a stampeding herd of wild bulls. Even the royal knights and court mages could only choose to be trampled to death or be knocked to death in the face of this vast sea of magical creatures. Even the less than a tenth of the forest was in danger. If they broke through the forest and ran into the emerald green plains, once they attacked the human army would be instantly routed and suffer heavy casualties. It was at this time that I Ching came to the last fortress that had been built outside the forest for close to 100 years, the last fortress that humans had built against the demon beast sea. Even in the fortress, one could already hear the rumbling sounds of the monsters charging over. The water in the teacup on the table had ripples that didn't stop because of the trembling of the ground. The pillars of smoke and flames that soared into the sky behind the forest showed just how bad the environment was. From time to time, the unique sound of wood fibers breaking could be heard when towering trees were knocked down, followed by the sound of birds fleeing in panic. Everything was telling I Ching just how terrifying the situation he was about to face was. Little Qian, Shuai, I've changed my mind. I Ching pulled out his sword and took a deep breath. Before the magic airship that brought us here pulls out its anchor, quickly get on it and escape with the people here. Even with the cheat-level ability of the War God's Blessing, coupled with the skills honed on the battlefield and the recently awakened power of the Brave Heart, it was already inconceivable for them to face hundreds of monsters at once. But this time, their enemies were actually close to 1 million. It was fine when he didn't see it, so this number of enemies was only in his mind. But after seeing it, I Ching didn't have the ambition to block all the monsters, he just hoped that Lin Qian and Xia Shuai could escape. Idiot I Ching, what do you want to do? Lin Qian was the first to protest. I'm also against it. Xia Shuai agreed with Lin Qian, classmate I Ching, it's not good to change your mind. If it was me, I could at least fight with the demons with my agility, but this situation is too disadvantageous for you. I Ching stopped joking and replied seriously, as expected, I think it's better for you to reconsider. The two girls looked at each other before they revealed a smile. Idiot I Ching, don't you know why we came here with you? Lin Qian put one hand on her waist, her right hand almost poking I Ching's nose. To be honest, I still feel unreal when that princess suddenly threw such a heavy burden on my shoulders. But if I'm with you, I'll feel that, maybe I can really do it, even with Lin Qian's somewhat shrewish temperament, saying this was no different from a confession, and a charming blush appeared on her face. But you coward, you actually want me to leave you behind and run away alone. How can I do such a thing? But the situation now is really dangerous. I Ching still found it difficult to let the girls go to hell with him. Aren't you afraid? Well, of course I'm afraid. Lin Qian wanted to be brave, but in the end, she showed a weak and helpless smile. To be honest, my legs are a little weak now. But no matter what, I can't leave you behind. Hasn't it always been like this since we were young? When they were young, although the two families were neighbors, because of the difference in their parents' jobs, they did not have much contact. I Ching's father was a narcotics officer, and her mother was a full-time housewife who occasionally did odd jobs. Lin Qian's mother was a famous TV star at that time, and her father was her mother's agent. Then one day, when Lin Qian was still in kindergarten, she was kidnapped by her mother's fanatical fans. Because her father's job was dangerous, I Ching, who received special education, was more mature and vigilant than other children. After notifying the police, little I Ching quietly followed the gangsters and used a series of plans to distract them and rescue the frightened little girl. In the end, she was still found by the two fanatical fans who had mental problems. Little I Ching was also injured by a gun during the chase. If the police had not come in time, she would have died there. Even today, I Ching's abdomen still had scars from that incident, but it was also from that time that Lin Qian had been following I Ching around. After I Ching lost his father at a young age, the girl forced herself to be strong and took care of him silently like an older sister. Of course, Lin Qian seemed to have taken care of I Ching more often. Objection, Ali. Xia Shuiyao was like a KY, mercilessly breaking the tacit eye contact between the two. She said in her usual tone, "Your Honor, I have something to say." You still want to joke at this time? Lin Qian subtly admired Xia Shuiyao's mentality. I'm from the heavenly department, Xia Shuiyao continued as if she did not hear her. Little Qian, Lin Qian, who is little Qian? We're childhood friends, so generally speaking, it's my victory. Although I don't know what you're talking about, I feel angry. The veins on Lin Qian's forehead were bulging. In this regard, I Ching could only laugh dryly and perfunctorily. However, the atmosphere of life and death became much more relaxed because of Xia Shuiyao's jesting. Not far away, the last barrier of the jungle was also destroyed by the monsters. The mighty monsters rushed towards the fortress like the tide of the Enchanting river. It's too late to run now. In this case, we can only fight to the end together. I Ching sighed, then raised his long sword and shouted at the soldiers in the fortress who were about to turn and run with fear. Although the Frost Eagle Empire is big, there's no way out. Behind us is the capital. Running away is useless. You will only be sent to the netherworld faster if you turn your back to the enemy. If we can't stop these monsters here, your wives, children, parents, and everything of humanity will be trampled and destroyed by these monsters, becoming fertilizer for the earth. I swear in the name of the hero that for the glory of humanity and the great victory, I will defend this place with you and will not take a single step back. Lin Qian used wind elemental magic when Yi Qing was speaking, increasing his voice by several times so that everyone present could hear him. Although they were very afraid of the endless sea of monsters, those soldiers knew that with the magic airships leaving, they couldn't outrun the four-legged monsters no matter what. Since running was a path to death, they might as well fight to the end like heroes. Especially after Sir Brave Warrior said those words, it was as if they had found a pillar of support. They all started shouting to boost their courage while trying their best to raise their morale. Defend this place to the death, we swear to never retreat. Yi Qing, who was the instigator, let out a sigh as his hand holding his sword was covered in sweat. Although there were guards appointed by the Empire, now that the hero had appeared here, there was no doubt that he was the center of everyone's attention and the role model of the soldiers. There were already some flying monsters that were flying fast that had entered the airspace of the fortress. The soldiers were trying their best to shoot them down with their crossbows, but the effects weren't that good. The most important thing was that the beast's hide would hit the fortress in less than half a minute. No matter who it was, their nerves were stretched to their limits at this moment. Even when a giant white hemisphere appeared in the forest, they didn't notice it at all. After that, Yi Qing realized that the white hemisphere that was spreading and tearing the earth apart was because of the high density of the air, creating something like a wind barrier. In short, there was a huge explosion that caused the air to spread at supersonic speed. Countless monsters that did not manage to get out of the range of the explosion were pulled up into the air along with the ground, before being torn into pieces that could not even be identified. Then, as the debris spread outwards in the air, they turned into something as powerful as a shotgun bullet, or perhaps even more powerful. Those monsters that had escaped the range of the white ball were all turned into sieves, and were thus engulfed in the explosion. Only the monsters that were wearing heavy armor and running in front were spared. When the aftermath of the explosion was about to engulf the fortress, the terrifying wind barrier finally stopped spreading, but this caused more serious secondary damage. The air in the white hemisphere was completely blown away by the powerful explosion, so much so that the space that occupied almost the entire forest became a vacuum. Once the force that expelled the air disappeared, the air would be sucked back into the vacuum under the strong atmospheric pressure. This phenomenon was more directly shown by the rotation of the planet. A huge tornado rose from the ground and appeared in the middle of the forest. Most of the monsters that escaped the explosion were once again sucked in and disappeared completely. Only a few monsters were left in front of the fortress. The tornado strangely didn't show any signs of movement until it disappeared. After it disappeared, the forest that was still in ruins was now completely barren. Through the telescope that Lin Qianqian made with her ice magic, Yi Qing saw a black-haired young man standing at the center of the explosion, at the eye of the tornado. He was punching the ground. At first, Yi Qing thought that after seeing the creator of all this, he would have feelings like awe or fear. But now, he only had the corner of his mouth twitching, but he didn't have such feelings. The reason was simple. Is that guy a pervert? Lin Qianqian summed it up concisely. Yes, because the other party was naked. Chapter 217. Let's push the time back 10 minutes. At that time, Su Xinxing was running toward the battlefield with the body of a black cat against the sound barrier. It was not that he could not break through the sound barrier to reach the state of supersonic speed, but that would seem to cause considerable damage to his hair, which was not too thick to begin with. Perhaps the friction would heat up, and by the time he reached his destination, his breed would have changed from a Chinese field cat, black, to a sphinx. While rushing, Su Xinxing was also thinking about how he should deal with those monsters. Logically speaking, not to mention millions of enemies, it was not like he had not fought enemies with more numbers. After all, in several interstellar wars, the number of enemy landing ships alone exceeded 100 million. But at that time, the world he was in was a relatively solid world. Even on Earth, the barriers of the world were much stronger than the world he was in now. With this prerequisite, Su Shenxing could use the holy sword Roland Dur to make the enemy's numbers become floating clouds in front of him. And because this world was once ruled by the Demon King and was even made into something like a lattice world, the power of the world was extracted by the demon realm as energy. All of this directly or indirectly caused the barriers of this world to become very fragile. If Su Shenxing took out the holy sword Roland Dur in this world, he was afraid that before he could wield it, the whole world would start from this point, causing a chain reaction to shatter. Therefore, the method of using Roland Dur to kill the enemy in one breath could be passed. If Su Shenxing was still in his human form, this wouldn't be a particularly big problem. The serious Su Shenxing could completely achieve extreme control over his strength. It wouldn't be impossible for him to find the right point of strength to deal with all the monsters with one punch. But for him in his cat form, it was a bit troublesome. Although he had been a cat for some time, this period of time at most allowed Su Shenxing to be subtly familiar with the way cats move. But it was unfortunately impossible for him to be able to perfectly control every bit of power in his body like a human. If he forced himself to perform the same actions as a human in his cat form, it was more likely that he did not have enough control over his strength. If he exerted too much strength, he would wipe out the entire human army, or if he exerted too little strength, he would not be able to wipe out all the enemies. The latter was still manageable. At most, he just needed to make up for it. As for the former, it was completely putting the cart before the horse. He had originally rushed over to save the Human Alliance army, but in the end, he had accidentally wiped out the Human Alliance army. Just as Su Shenxing was still distressed, the sound of a siren interrupted his thoughts and made him subconsciously look at the sky. Today was a sunny day. The clear sky was so wide that it made people feel relaxed and happy. There were no clouds in the sky, and the sunlight happily sprinkled on every corner. And in this clear sky, there was something flying in the sky. Steam train? No, that's... Because of the structure of a cat's eyes, his vision was slightly worse during the day. So after his pupils had completely shrunk into two vertical slits, Su Shenxing was barely able to see what it was. River Moon? In the blink of an eye, just as Su Shenxing recognized River Moon that was originally flying in the sky as if it suddenly felt Newton's anger. Suddenly, like a plane that had an accident, it fell diagonally from the sky. Although he did not know why River Moon, which was displayed in the museum, appeared here, it did not stop Su Shenxing from quickly running towards the direction where it was about to crash to rescue it. But it was all too late. When Su Shenxing arrived, River Moon had successfully landed with Mo Li's help. Mr. Landlord, Jasmine, who didn't look much younger than Qin Xingyan, comforted Xingyan, a dream, and Xinshan Xianzao, who were pale with fright. She then turned to look at Su Shenxing, who was rushing over, and smiled faintly. "I'm here to pick you up." Su Shenxing stared blankly at the girl's face for a few seconds. Then, as if relieved, he sighed, "Looks like it's okay, it's not to a dangerous extent." Then, he put on a straight face and asked Mo Li, "Speaking of which, didn't you say that after a while, the effect of turning into a cat would disappear? It's been so long, why am I still in cat form?" It was fine if it did not affect his movements and he could occasionally act cute and get food, but at this time, it was indeed inconvenient to be in cat form. The effect of my magic has disappeared. Emily studied Su Xinxing's face for a few seconds. Then, he pulled out a strand of Su Xinxing's beard. As Su Xinxing rolled on the ground in pain and meowed, Emily continued to study him for a few more seconds. Finally, he said with certainty, "The reason why you didn't change back, landlord, is because you didn't want to change back." "What?" "Landlord, you're basically immune to magic. This state not only makes it difficult to cast spells on you, but it also prevents some magic from dispelling effects. When my magic expires, all you have to do is think, 'I want to turn back into a human,' in your mind, and you'll be able to revert back to human form. But you didn't think of that from the beginning, did you?" It was true. After turning into a cat, although there was a lot of trouble, there were also a lot of corresponding benefits. As a result, Su Xinxing was a little happy in the end. He really didn't think that he would change back to his original form. While Su Xinxing was feeling self-loathing, Emily had already carried him onto the river moon. "Wait a minute." He struggled for a bit. Although he was surprised to see Jiang Yu sitting in the conductor's seat, he still shouted, "I still have things to do. Head south. We're going to the battlefield." Jiang Yu pulled up the corner of her skirt and bowed slightly to Su Xinxing. Then, she opened the airlock and blew the whistle. "The river moon is about to depart. Next stop, Great Battlefield." "Wow, this is incredible." Qin Xingyan couldn't help but exclaim as she watched the horde of magical creatures surging forward like a tidal wave from the sky. "It feels like I'm watching a Hollywood movie." Chihaya Fukuyama couldn't help but sigh. Emily carried Su Xinxing, who was still in his cat form, to the entrance of the train. He asked Su Xinxing with uncertainty, "Do we really have to do this?" "No problem. After dropping me down, have Jiang Yu immediately distance herself from here and build a protective shield." "Understood." After saying that, Emily threw Su Xinxing out of the door without hesitation. Chapter 218. Although some unexpected factors caused him to run naked, in fact, Su Xinxing didn't care too much about it. After all, he was a man who ran naked in front of an entire interstellar fleet in the universe. The crew members who saw his naked body on the starships could go back and forth from the sun to the earth twice if they lined up head to tail. In a world of swords and magic with a civilization level of the Middle Ages, after asking Emily to weave a set of clothes similar to a windbreaker that could barely cover the vital parts, Su Xinxing breathed a sigh of relief. At this time, I Ching and the others had also found him. You are." Although Su Xinxing's previous naked posture had impacted I Ching's worldview to a certain extent, he also knew that if it were not for him, the human coalition forces would really be in danger this time. Other things aside, at least the three of them would definitely die in this fortress. Su Xinxing hammered his palm and realized that I Ching had never seen him in human form. "Ahem, I heard about you from Xiao He." So Su Xinxing simply pretended to be a senior and said seriously, "If I must say, I'm the previous hero." "The previous?" I Ching showed a look of shock. Compared to I Ching, who did not have any outstanding achievements so far, the previous hero was undoubtedly a true legendary figure in the true sense. At that time, the human situation was more difficult than it was now. It was better to say that they were actually defeated, and it was an indisputable fiasco. If it were not for the sudden appearance of the previous hero, who led his companions and the native heroes like Finn to execute the decapitation tactic on Hellcrown, in fact, the Hellcrown surrendered himself, perhaps until now, the human race would have been the slaves of the Hellcrown and could only live a difficult life under the oppression of the Hellcrown. It was precisely because of this that the previous hero was praised from generation to generation. Although it had only been 15 years since then, but, in the story, you left after defeating the Hellcrown? I Ching asked strangely. If this legendary figure was still alive, then he would not have been summoned by the princess of the Frost Eagle Empire as the hope of saving the world. Judging from the strength of this man in the story, it should be easy for him to pin the entire Hellcrown to the ground and beat them up. As a matter of fact, the attack just now proved this point. Although I Ching, who had undergone compulsory education, found it hard to believe, it was true that the other party had only punched the ground once, and wiped out millions of monsters along with a vast forest from this world. That's right, but for some reason, I came back. Su Shenxing continued to answer seriously. Since you can come back, it means that this world has some kind of connection with Earth, right? I Ching did not doubt him and asked expectantly. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. There was no ready-made passage between Earth and this world. Back then, Su Shenxing directly broke through space to return to the great demonic realm. Now, I'm only accurately located the world Su Shenxing was in through the information of the Cladric Sea. Then, he used the divinity of Chihaya Fukuyama to wrap the river moon. Finally, he barely passed through the world barrier and crossed the sea of nothingness to come to this lattice world. Su Shenxing gave a simple explanation to I Ching. I Ching expressed that, although he didn't understand, he felt that it was very powerful. He also understood that ordinary methods couldn't return to Earth. But you don't have to worry. When we leave, we'll take you along the way. Su Shenxing gave a thumbs up and pointed to the river moon behind him. The steampunk-style locomotive that didn't exist in this world made I Ching and the others inexplicably look forward to it. But before that, there are other things to do. Even if Su Shenxing didn't specify what he wanted to do, I Ching could more or less guess it. So, Senior, what do you plan to do? Is it simply to help the humans defeat the Demon King's army? I Ching asked. But even he knew that such a simple and straightforward tactic wouldn't be beneficial to them. Even if they helped the humans defeat the Demon King's army this time, who could guarantee when the next conflict between the humans and the demon race would be intensified to the extreme? Since the humans could oppress the demon race to the point of revolt once, even if they were lucky enough to pacify the demon race this time, who knew if the demon race would suddenly revolt again when they were oppressed to the extreme? After all, the humans had always been a race that didn't know what was called a lesson. The endless wars of life and death on Earth were very good proof of this. Then, what do you plan to do? I Ching asked curiously. Putting aside the fierce battle for the time being, when he was free, he also thought of a similar problem. Unless this former hero took action, it was impossible to exterminate the demon race. After all, in terms of numbers, after decades of including the reign of the Demon King, the ratio of the demon race, most of them were mixed blood, to the human race had reached 1 to 10. This was a rather shocking number. Obviously, the reproductive ability of the human race had successfully made up for the low reproductive ability of the demon race. It should be known that the physical condition of the demon race, even if they were mixed blood, was much better than that of the human race. 15 years ago, when the Human Revival Army and the Demon King's army fought, it was basically, "There's a demon here. Everyone, don't talk about Jianghu morality." Hurry up, 100 men charge up and chop him to death. This kind of purely relying on human lives to make up for the difference in strength was extremely difficult. They barely managed to hold on until the arrival of Su Xinxing and the others. And now, if a considerable number of the demon race had not joined the Demon King's army because they had formed bonds and feelings with the people around them as early as 15 years ago, and because they did not expose their identities, the demon army, which was far more numerous than that of the past, would have been able to crush the human coalition army long ago. And this time, if the rebellion was suppressed purely by force, the world would sooner or later be in big trouble. I guess. Su Xinxing stroked his chin, thought for a moment, and then said, the reason why the humans and the demon race are still like fire and water is that the racial assimilation is not thorough enough. If this war did not happen, they could continue to live together like before for another 50 or 60 years. When the older generation is all dead, the new generation of mixed blood will not be able to distinguish between each other, and they should not continue to hate each other so much. But, isn't it too late to say this now? Yi Qing asked, puzzled. No, it's not too late. As long as we can find something else for them to do, we can still stop the war for the time being. Su Xinxing scratched his face, made a decision, and said with a righteous face, forget it, it's not the first time anyway. Only by letting the world feel real pain, can this painful horror suppress the war, and bring the world to stability and peace. This. Yi Qing hesitated, and then complained, is this a death flag? Chapter 219. The battle between the humans and the Demon King's army was a mess. Be it the demons or the humans, the green plains were like a black hole that would never be satisfied, endlessly devouring the lives of both sides. The elder princess of the Frost Eagle Empire stood on the front lines as usual, raising the morale of the human soldiers. However, after such a long time, the morale of the humans was almost gone. Fortunately, the enemy's morale did not seem to be much higher either. Although our army has suffered great losses, the Demon King's army has also suffered great losses. With the difference in population between the two sides, as long as our army can hold on for a little longer, the enemy's army will be on the verge of collapse. Recalling the understanding of the current situation of the war, the princess could not help but have some doubts. Even if they were right, the empire had already lost a terrifying number of people. Coupled with the post-war plague and other natural and man-made disasters, even if they won, the Frost Eagle Empire would not be able to recover for a long time. No, it was not just the Frost Eagle Empire, even the other human kingdoms were in the same situation. It was the same for the demons. Their population was much smaller than the humans in the first place. After such a fierce battle, there would only be 2 or 3 of them left. Was this the result that both sides wanted? The princess was a little confused. Why are we fighting? If she were to ask others this question, she might get a righteous answer such as for the glory of the empire, or for the fate of mankind. She shook her head and decided not to think about such useless things. Instead, she focused on the current situation. No matter what, she had to win this war first. Because no matter what, at least the victors would have a better life than the losers. If that was the case, even if it was for the sake of the people who believed in her and the empire and threw their lives into the meat grinder that was the war, she had to win this war. Reporting to the elder princess. Blood-burning Soraya has appeared in front of the Demon King's army. A messenger hurriedly ran over from the side and reported the latest situation on the battlefield to her. Thank you for your hard work. Go and have the royal mages, Chi Sung Tuan, get ready. Once she joins the battle, they will work together to cast spells to snipe her. We must not let her rush into our formation." The princess nodded and ordered in an orderly manner. "Also, mobilize 2 crossbow squads and a squad of giant shields to protect the royal mages and prevent any sneak attacks." "Understood." The messenger saluted the princess of the Frost Eagle Empire, the backbone of the army, and quickly retreated to relay the orders to the corresponding squads. Although this was a fantasy world of swords and magic, the level of magic here wasn't that high. Therefore, in most cases, the regular battles here were no different from the clashes between armies in Europe during the Middle Ages. The only thing that one had to pay attention to was the mages, who were great killing machines, or the high-level demons like the blood-burning Soroya. Hearing the intense battle cries coming from the front, Her Royal Highness couldn't help but sigh. It seemed like there was still no way to determine the victor today. Both sides had to continue using the flesh and blood of their soldiers to fill the pit of this battle. Just as she was thinking this, the sky suddenly darkened. "What's going on?" The girl frowned and her heart sank. Could it be the magic of the demon race? Because of this sudden change in light, there was a slight commotion in the surrounding army formation. "Don't panic, it's just a normal change in the weather." The princess had no choice but to order the wind elemental mage beside her to raise his voice so that most of the soldiers could hear him. She pretended to be calm and comforted him. The reason she did not use this method was because it would be easy for the enemy to hear their arrangement. Instead, they would be countered and put in a disadvantageous situation. After doing all this, she said to the messenger beside her, "Tell the Coral Regiment to use magic to disperse the dark clouds in the sky." After a while, the messenger ran back with a panicked expression. "Your Highness, it's a failure. The Coral Regiment's mages said that they can't disperse the clouds in the sky." The princess's expression turned even worse when she heard this. Could it be a new trick of the Demon King's army? Speaking of which, compared to the humans, the civilians of this world did not have good food and were generally deficient in vitamin A, so almost all of them had night blindness. The demon race's night vision was indeed much better. In this kind of dim situation, they should have the upper hand, but soon, she realized that she had guessed wrong. The demon race seemed to have fallen into a small chaos caused by the sudden change in the weather. Just as the princess was puzzled, the dark clouds in the sky changed. Like a mirage, a figure wearing thick, dark golden armor that covered almost his entire body appeared above the dark clouds. Not a bad world. This king has decided that this will be the next territory of this king. Bastards living on this land, kill yourselves. Don't dirty this king's sacred land. Otherwise, when this king makes a move, it won't be as easy as dying. The thunderous voice exploded in the clouds. Everyone heard these words that could only be described as arrogant and conceited. How unlucky. It wasn't easy for us to fight to our heart's content, but a fool pretending to be mysterious appeared. Burning blood, Soraya coldly snorted as she looked at the figure in the clouds and said coldly, "Is this person crazy?" Even the Princess Royal from the human side had a strange look on her face. After all, it wasn't difficult to create a mirage in this magic world, so no one believed that person's words and treated it as a strange joke. "You damned bastards, you dare to ignore this king's good intentions. This king will punish you." The voice seemed to be angry from embarrassment. Saying this, the figure in the clouds stretched out a hand towards the ground and sent it towards the green plains. "Good. Let me expose you, you pretentious bastard. Soraya sneered. She waved the blood-red scythe in her hand and chopped at the huge hand descending from the sky. The human army was not as daring as she was. They only set up several dozen layers of giant protective barriers under the princess's command. The next moment, Soraya and the hand collided. She looked like a girl, but her actual age couldn't be verified. Her weapon turned into ashes upon contact, and the skin all over her body cracked from the powerful pressure. Blood spurted out, and she flew into a corner of the battlefield like a blood-red meteor. Then, the human barriers that could withstand the bombardment of intercontinental missiles were like paper. They couldn't even delay the huge hand and were smashed apart in an instant. After that, the huge palm landed on the ground like a hot knife through butter, leaving a bottomless wound on the green field. It was a huge palm print that divided the entire field into two halves. Chapter 220. There was no shockwave that should have occurred when a huge amount of energy hit the ground, nor was there the terrifying power of the blow that killed millions of demons. But the palm that fell from the sky left an indelible impression on everyone in an even more shocking way. It had forcibly changed the landscape, adding a huge basin and 5 insurmountable canyons on the green field. If one looked down from the sky, they would find that it was a palm print. I Ching and the others who had rushed back to the battlefield from the fortress saw this scene. This made the brave young man involuntarily think of the plan that Su Xinxing had told him before. More than 10 minutes ago, simply put, it's to scare them. Su Xinxing explained to I Ching and the others, as long as there's a powerful enemy coveting this land, and whether it's the human race or the demon race, they won't be a match for that enemy. Only by joining hands can they resist the pressure. When there's a way to survive, do you think they'll make such a ruckus? War and the like won't happen, but there's still a lot of internal struggle for power, I Ching replied. This young man was surprisingly honest. Su Xinxing sighed in his heart and continued. This kind of thing can't be stopped as long as humans exist. What we want to do is not to be the spiritual mentors of the humans or demons, that's for Stalin and Yuri. Our goal is to simply stop them from fighting each other and beating each other's brains out. Yes, I understand. I Ching seemed to be a little confused about not being able to do the best, but fortunately, he was not the kind of young man who thought that God was the most important and labor was the second most important, so he accepted Su Xinxing's idea. So what should we do specifically? First, I'll pretend to be a guy from another world and beat their brains out. Wait, I feel that something is wrong. It's okay. The people of this world are quite receptive. After all, the Demon King came out of nowhere, Su Xinxing said confidently. That's not what I meant. Forget it, please continue. I Ching seemed to want to say something, but in the end, he looked like he had given up and waited for Su Xinxing to continue. Then, when I beat them up on the ground, you'll appear as the messenger of justice. Su Xinxing continued. I understand. You want me to lead them to fight against the enemy you're pretending to be, and then you'll pretend to be defeated by the combined forces of the two sides, right? I Ching was eager to try. No, I will press both sides to the ground together with you. I only let you out to block 1 or 2 of my attacks to gain some reputation and buy some time. You don't have enough reputation in this world, so you can't unite both sides to fight against me. Su Xinxing shook his head and said something that made the corner of I Ching's mouth twitch. Also, because they might see through my weakness, I won't go easy on you. You'd better use 120% of your energy. Otherwise, if I hit you, you won't be gaining reputation but losing reputation." At first, Yi Qing thought that Su Xinxing was joking when he said that he would hit the center of the earth. However, looking at the current situation, if she didn't use her trump card, she might really be hit into the center of the earth. Even if he was hit into the earth's mantle, ordinary people wouldn't be able to bear it. While he was in a daze, the figure in the sky had reached out his hand again. "The second attack is coming. Everyone retreat." The princess regained her senses and felt a bitter taste in her mouth. She had lost a lot of her people in the war. She didn't expect to encounter such an inexplicable thing. And judging from the strength of the enemy, she was afraid that if she wasn't careful, she would be completely wiped out. Even the princess wasn't naive enough to think that the bones of her soldiers would be harder than the granite layer underground. On the other hand, the demons were in an even worse situation. Because Soraya, the marshal, had knelt down, and the palm that was falling from the sky once again, the entire demon army was in chaos. The demon generals couldn't even gather their troops properly. Just as the morale of both sides was low, and the soldiers retreated or even began to disperse, a few people rushed toward the huge palm that was falling like a meteor. "Mr. Brave Warrior?" The princess immediately recognized the young man who was dragging his long sword and rushing at the front. Although she was happy that he didn't die in the horde of beasts, she was immediately worried that he would be seriously injured or even die under the giant palm like Soraya. Right now, Yi Qing clearly did not have the luxury of looking around. Although Su Xinxing's palm strike was already very oppressive from afar, when she was under it, she could truly experience its terror. It felt as if the entire sky had collapsed and was going to completely bury the world. It was truly not an ordinary kind of despair. "Xiao Qian, Shui Yao, send me up." He gritted his teeth and roared without looking back. "Ah, this is crazy." Lin Qian was also restless under this terrible pressure. She simply shouted and waved the wand in her hand. "I don't care what happens next." The gem at the top of the wand emitted a dazzling light. Immediately, a small hurricane rose from the ground and swept Xia Shuiyao and Yi Qing up into the sky. All the magic in this world had a range, and this hurricane was no exception. After lifting the two of them up about 500 meters, the hurricane couldn't go any higher. At this time, the pure white magic behind Xia Shuiyao condensed into a pair of beautiful and flawless angelic wings. It was hard to imagine that this magic came from a person who talked dirty all the time. "Although I really want to be with Yi Qing for a while, if this continues, we'll only become minced meat." Xia Shuiyao's voice as usual made Yi Qing wonder if the girl was afraid of this feeling. "I think that uncle won't go easy on you, so Yi Qing, you'd better be careful. At this point, it's too late to run away, right?" Yi Qing laughed heartily, and then his face became serious again. He raised his sword toward the giant palm that was as big as a mountain falling from the sky. "I'm going." This sentence has an inexplicable feeling of being perverted. "Xia Shuiyao, can you let me be serious until the end?" Yi Qing, who had finally gathered his strength, lost his momentum and almost threw the sword in his hand. He could only cry but have no tears. Chapter 221. Question: what would happen if the human body, moving at a relative speed of nearly 800 meters per second, hit a surface harder than King Kong stone? A. It would be scattered all over the ground. Yi Qing didn't want to be scattered all over the ground, so he didn't really hit Su Xinxing's palm that came down from the sky. Instead, he raised his brave heart and battle god's blessing to the maximum, so that the moment before he touched the huge palm, he used his sword to fiercely swing the strongest sword he could do so far. This was a sword that could cut the sky and cut the earth. Although he had the help of Battle God's blessing, which allowed him to be familiar with all weapons and moves, there was no doubt that I Ching had stepped into the realm of a master swordsman through the continuous battles. If it was at the beginning of his time travel, when he met blood-burning Soroya, he could have defeated the famous former legendary general in an instant with the power of this sword alone. Of course, this was of no use at the moment. Other than not being slapped all over the ground, I Ching's long sword didn't even manage to cut through the skin of the giant palm. She only managed to hold it back, slowing down the speed of its descent by 5 centimeters per second. The force of the huge palm's fall pressed him into the palm, and even straightening his body became an extravagant hope. At this rate, when the huge palm fell and Su Xinxing really frightened the natives of this world, they would probably have to dig up I Ching's remains from the Paleozoic era. Idiot I Ching! Lin Qianqian's shout vaguely reached I Ching's ears, but unfortunately, the teenager found that he had no way to reverse the current situation. I didn't expect that even with all my strength, I couldn't win against that person's palm. It seems that I'm only at this level. How embarrassing, completely unaware that the person he was comparing himself to was abnormal, I Ching just felt sad for his own weakness. He was completely unaware that apart from the experts of the cultivation school, the type of people who used external or internal forces such as the spiritual chi of heaven and earth to optimize and transform their body/soul, the most typical example being the cultivators, he was, in a sense, standing at the pinnacle of humanity. At this moment, 2 powerful forces suddenly rose from both sides of the battlefield, turning into 2 pillars of light, one black and one white. They forcibly blocked the huge palm, preventing it from falling and causing even more damage. And because of this, I Ching was able to avoid being smashed into the ground by the giant palm, saving her life. I Ching, are you alright? Due to the loss of wind pressure, I Ching began to fall from the sky. Fortunately, Xia Shuayao, who had been paying attention to his condition, sped up the moment the giant palm stopped and barely caught him. What's going on? What happened? I Ching, who had finally regained her senses, subconsciously asked these 2 questions. She believed that these were the thoughts of everyone present. Only then did they notice that at some point in time, on both sides of the crater created by the first palm, 2 people were looking at each other from afar. Their stories had been sung by countless people, their figures had been worshipped by countless people as legends, they had once been the role models of a region, leading people to victory. Third uncle? The eldest princess, who was methodically organizing the retreat, couldn't help but cry out in surprise when she saw the man in the white pillar of light not far away. Although Finn had left the Frost Eagle Empire's royal castle 15 years ago and his whereabouts were unknown, the royal family had announced to the public that this hero who had once followed the brave Sir to crusade against the Demon King had died of an illness. Neither the retired emperor nor the current emperor had given up on the search for him. The former missed his youngest son, while the latter held a considerable degree of vigilance against this royal family member who had great prestige among the people. It was precisely because of this that although the eldest princess was only 5 years old when Finn went missing and couldn't remember anything clearly, she still knew what this third uncle looked like from some portraits later on. Perhaps because of his great strength, Finn's appearance hadn't changed much over the years, so the eldest princess recognized him at a glance. His Majesty the Demon King. The man in the black pillar of light caused a wave of disbelief among the demons. Unlike the humans, the demons who had joined the Demon King's army this time were basically old soldiers from 15 years ago, so naturally they could recognize the appearance of the highest commander of the demons. In fact, most of the demons originally didn't believe that the Demon King was dead. Now that Alina had stood up, they felt that they had a pillar of support, so they were all overjoyed and felt that the time for the demons to rise again had come. However, the thunderous roar that came from the sky made everyone's heart sink. "Is this your last hope? What a joke! I haven't even used my full strength yet." That's right, even if the legendary hero, Demon King, appeared, he could only block that unknown monster's palm. Just that palm alone was already so terrifying. If that monster really fought seriously, how strong would it be? The huge figure pierced through the clouds, as if the armored giant had finally bent down, broke through the shackles of the shadows, and then viciously punched the ground. Even if that punch was still thousands of meters away from the ground, with it as the center, it had already set off a terrifying storm. The magical flying kites raised by the humans and the two-footed flying dragons of the demon clan, who were originally hovering around the battlefield to compete for air supremacy, were suddenly blown away. Even Xia Shuiao could not stabilize her body. She held I Ching in her arms and was blown to a corner of the battlefield. The power of this attack had completely exceeded the knowledge of the humans and demons of this world, and it had also destroyed their psychological defenses. Human warriors. Soldiers of the demon race. Finn and Alina raised their weapons and shouted at the top of their lungs. "There's no retreat behind us. This is a battle that concerns the survival of the human race. Now is the critical moment. This is a battle that will determine the rise and fall of the demons. Draw your weapons. Use the glory of the human race as your shield, and the pride of the kingdom as your sword. Forget your cowardice. Straighten your unyielding spines and erect your spears of courage." The halos of courage and glory on the two of them spread. At this moment, no matter if it was the human army or the demons, everyone felt the same soaring morale. Their blood was boiling, and their hearts were beating fast. The fear from before had been completely banished to the highest heavens. Right now, they only wanted to fight to the death with the enemy. Fight for the world that we live in together. Charge with me. Attack with me. Chapter 222. Finn and his wife were naturally brought over by Jiang Yu and the others while Su Xinxing was acting pretentiously and Yi Qing was trying her best to stall for time, although she did not manage to stall for much time, on the River Moon. To be honest, even Su Xinxing hadn't thought that the Finn couple would actually be able to block his attack. Even if he had gone easy on them, and in order to shock the audience, in other words, the people of this world, he had deliberately let Jasmine spread the power that was originally concentrated on her fist to a third of the size of the emerald green plains. However, he had to go all the way. After Finn and the others blocked the destructive attack, Su Xinxing pretended to be exhausted and said with a hoarse voice, "Well done. This king admits that you have exceeded my expectations. If that's the case, then this king will bestow upon you the right to struggle at death's door in this world. The next time this king comes with an army, this world will be in this king's pocket." With that said, Su Xinxing secretly gave a signal to Mo Li, and Mo Li came into contact with the illusion projection in the sky. And in the eyes of the people of this world, the former hero Finn and the former demon king Alina had repelled the unbelievably powerful enemy from another world and successfully protected this world. The originally gloomy sky seemed to be celebrating for them as the thick clouds gradually dispersed. Behind the clouds, bright sunlight shone down, leaving behind mottled shadows on the green plains after the battle. This was a glorious victory, but the people did not have the time to celebrate. The words of the visitor from another world were like lead weights that smashed into everyone's hearts. They could not help but feel worried for the terrifying future. Under such circumstances, the humans and demons naturally did not have the heart to continue fighting. The Finn couple looked at each other. Although they had achieved their final goal, they could not feel happy when they saw the despair on the faces of the soldiers on both sides. Su Shinxing's plan was good, but that fellow's exaggerated combat strength was still sky-shattering as usual. The Finn couple, who were used to this from the previous battle, were still fine, but this time, the humans were mostly new soldiers. Almost none of the soldiers in the Demon King's army had directly met Su Shinxing before, other than a few demon generals. Almost all of them had shit, causing the drug to be a little too strong. Be it the human or demon soldiers, they were probably traumatized by Su Shinxing's destructive attack. This could not go on. My name is Finn Watkins. Finn looked at Alina apologetically. Because his combat strength was weaker than Alina's, in fact, Finn did not have any authority at home. He even married into the family. When he met Su Shinxing in his cat form, he called himself Finn Gilkit because of his wife's surname. But this time, since he wanted to revive the hope of the human race for the future, he naturally could not use that surname. You may not know me, so let me introduce myself. Isn't Watkins the surname of the Frost Eagle Empire's royal family? Is he the illegitimate son of His Majesty? Judging from his appearance and age, he looks like it. Indeed, I heard that His Majesty was not particularly fond of womanizing before he ascended the throne. That was because His Majesty felt that he had no chance of inheriting the throne. After all, the reputation of the heroic third prince was much higher than His Majesty's. Wait, what was the name of the third prince again? I think he was called Finn Watkins. Facts had proven that even the iron-blooded soldiers had a gossipy heart, and the usually mysterious gossip of the royal family was even more eagerly awaited. Therefore, there were countless novelists who secretly wrote about the romantic history of the royal family. Even if a batch of them were killed, they would still continue to appear one after another. Perhaps some of the veterans have already recognized me. That's right, I am the warrior who followed His Majesty the hero into Hellcrown. Finn's voice rang out again, and the whispering soldiers quieted down a little. Back then, we fought against the Demon King together and won in the end. Although the truth was that Alina had surrendered, Finn simply said some nonsense in order to raise the morale of the humans. But His Majesty the hero did not exterminate the demon race. He believed that humans and demons could coexist. To this day, I still believe in this. And now that His Majesty the hero has left, we will have to face a stronger and more terrifying enemy than before. This is no longer the time to fight against the demon race. We must unite all the forces that can be united and become stronger to face the enemy's invasion. Finn's words immediately caused the human soldiers to whisper noisily. However, he only released his aura and gestured for them to quiet down, and the scene quieted down again. I know that this may be difficult, but now is not the time to care about this. After we fight to the death with the new enemy, if we can still stand under the blue sky together, it won't be too late to make them pay their debts. Oh! Of course, the day of fighting to the death with the new enemy would never come. Compared to Finn, Alina's side was much more convenient. This was because His Majesty the Demon King was stronger than the entire Demon King's army combined. The girl, Air, I mean, the girl's wife slightly revealed her strength, and the demons who were originally quite lively immediately became more obedient than dogs. After all, these demons had not been assimilated into the human race for a long time, and they had not yet established the 8 honors and 8 disgraces. They still believed that the strong were respected, and the new demons and mixed bloods who had self-respect almost did not participate in the battle. Furthermore, Soraya's whereabouts were unknown, so the Demon King's army was still under his command. Actually, convincing these soldiers is just the beginning. The real difficulty is to talk to the politicians of the various countries. Finn and Alina found an opportunity to leave their respective camps and find Su Xinxing. Finn sighed. I couldn't stand those things, so I ran away from home. Ouch! Before he finished speaking, Alina pinched his arm. Didn't you say that you ran away from home because you didn't want to marry your fiancé? One of the reasons. Finn immediately explained with a smile. I definitely fell in love with you at first sight. Believe it or not, the fiancé that my father arranged for me was a famous beauty in the imperial city. I didn't even see her before I ran away to find you. Su Xinxing did not look at this shameless couple who were showing off their affection. He turned his face and looked at Yi Qing and the others. Have you guys thought about it? You really don't want to return to Earth with me? That's right, I've decided to elope with classmate Yi Qing. Xia Shuayao replied righteously. All right, this was also a shameless couple. Elope my ass. I'm very tired now, don't make me complain, okay? Lin Qianqian looked weak. She had used a lot of energy in the previous battle, mainly buffs, and now she was exhausted. Because I'm still not at ease with the current situation. It's not good for Uncle Finn and the others to have no one to help them. Yi Qing showed a simple and honest smile. The time ratio between this world and Earth is 5-to-1, right? I plan to stay here for half a year and come back when the dust settles. It's about a month on Earth. I'll have to trouble you to help me apply for leave from the school on Earth and make up an excuse for my parents. You're quite ambitious. Su Xinxing sighed helplessly. After all, giving up halfway is not in line with my concept of justice. Yi Qing said matter-of-factly, but then showed a shy smile. Well, I'll have to trouble you to pick us up in half a year. Understood, I'll come back then. Su Xinxing nodded in agreement. Anyway, Emily had already set up a beacon in this world, so he should be able to come over when the time comes. Speaking of which, there's one more thing I want to ask you. Where did your familiar, Xiaohei, go? Yi Qing continued to ask. Back then, it was thanks to the blessing it gave me that I was able to survive in this world. I've always wanted to thank it. It went to a faraway place, and probably won't come back. Su Xinxing looked into the distance. He couldn't let Emily turn him into a cat because of this, could he? Is that so? Yi Qing probably misunderstood him and showed a sad expression. Su Xinxing thought about it, but in the end, he still didn't clear up this misunderstanding. Sir Hero, are you really not going to play in this world for a while? Alina asked. No, I haven't been home for too long, and I'm starting to miss the wooden bed at home. Su Xinxing politely declined. If it was the first world he had transmigrated to, Olivia who had obtained the Holy Sword, he might have really played in that world for a while. After all, he was a prince in that world, and he had friends all over the world. However, there wasn't much to be missed in this world. After all, he only came in to beat up the demons, accepted Demon King Alina's surrender, and left, Mr. Landlord, it's about time to leave." After Su Xinxing added magic to the seal, Emily, who had returned to her lowly form, poked her head out of the train. "Do you have a time limit in this world?" Su Xinxing asked curiously. "No, but if we don't leave now," Emily's little face was serious. "I won't be able to get the first victory of the day." She was probably the only transmigrator who would rush home to get the first victory after transmigrating to another world for a day. The train's whistle blew, followed by the clanging sound of the train, and River Moon slowly rose from the ground into the sky. Chapter 223. Why do I feel like I didn't play any role in coming to this world? Chihaya Fukuyama, who had been staying in Jiangjin like a decoration from beginning to end, muttered in dissatisfaction. "If I knew this would happen, I would have stayed in Jiangjin to continue learning about gods from Earth. Teacher, don't worry. Since Emily asked you to come, it means that you're definitely useful." Su Xinxing comforted her. "Really? What use do I have? To ward off evil?" Su Xinxing hesitated and guessed uncertainly. The girl rolled her eyes at him. In fact, the reason why Emily pulled Chihaya Fukuyama onto the train was because he needed her help. As a god, once Chihaya Fukuyama sat on Jiangyu would become a divine carriage, in a broad sense, and objects with divinity that were not bound by water and soil like Earth God were the easiest to pass through the world barrier. But in fact, compared to Chihaya Fukuyama, Su Xinxing was more concerned about the other girl in the carriage. "Jiangyu, I always thought that you were already..." He thought for a moment, and felt that using the word dead to describe a train was a little inappropriate, so he changed it. "Already disappeared, I, who can't run on the train, have indeed lost the original meaning of life." The girl turned around and explained to Su Xinxing with a smile. "But in the museum, after seeing everyone smile, I vaguely found some new meaning of life. But this way, compared to before, I need more time to prepare, and can only appear in this form for a short while." "I see. Wait, isn't the situation now very bad?" Su Xinxing nodded in realization at first, but then he realized that if the girl was not lying, from the Earth to the Lattice world, and then wandering in that world for half a day before starting the return journey, this period of time did not seem like the so-called a short while, no matter how he looked at it. "Ah, are you talking about this?" Jiang Yu lifted her skirt slightly. Su Xinxing discovered that under the black dress, the girl's legs were gradually disappearing. "Don't worry, I've already confirmed this with Emily." Xinyan A Dream was the one who replied to Su Xinxing. Based on the speed at which the River Moon crosses the world's barrier, the River Moon will last until we get off at the museum station. Speaking of which, the museum will probably be in a mess after discovering that a big guy is missing from its exhibition hall. When Su Xinxing thought of the poor museum director in Jiangjin, he couldn't help but feel sympathy for him. The strange robber incident had only just passed. "I used a paper talisman to leave an illusion there. Although there might be some discrepancies in the details because of time constraints, it's still a 1080p high-definition image. It should be able to deceive everyone until we return." Qin Xingyan hurriedly explained. Su Xinxing tried not to worry about the problem of the illusion's resolution. He shifted his attention to Emily, who hadn't spoken yet and was only looking out of the window. "What's wrong, Emily? Is there anything to see outside?" Logically speaking, because they were about to cross the world's barrier, the outside was either the aurora-like sea of ether or the white world's barrier. Although it would be very novel at first, it would be boring after looking at it for a long time. The sea of ether. Something's not right. Jasmine furrowed her adorable brows as she looked outside the window. She muttered in a soft voice that made people scratch their heads in confusion, "There are so many spatial ripples that it's abnormal. Furthermore, there seems to be some sort of foreign object present as well. Passing through this world barrier might take even longer than expected. Wait, then does the river moon have enough time?" Qin Xinyan immediately asked nervously. "Look at the waves of the sea of ether, it looks like a dog." "Don't use such a clumsy method to change the topic." Qin Xinyan couldn't help but complain. After living with Emily for a long time, normal people would become like this. There's good news and bad news. Mr. Su, which one do you want to hear first? After a short while, because the river moon was one, or rather, the river moon was the main body, Jiang Yu seemed to have suddenly noticed the situation outside the car and asked Su Xinxing. "Let's hear it in the order you want." Su Xinxing thought about it and finally returned the decision to Jiang Yu. "Then let's talk about the good news first. The good news is that I found a world fragment in the Sea of Ether. I don't know if it's a large transportation vehicle or a simple isolated island. In short, we have a place to stay, so we don't have to worry about not having enough supplies." Jiang Yu was only an employee of the railway department before, but after rushing out of Asia with Emily, well, in fact, they had already rushed out of the world. In short, after that, Jiang Yu seemed to have learned how to control the river moon without anyone teaching her. Even the way she spoke was completely different from the shy girl from before. She was full of the charm of the main computer of various spaceships in movies and animations. Then what's the bad news? Su Xinxing and the others were relieved that they didn't have to get lost in time and space, but then they remembered that there seemed to be another bad news. The bad news is, before Jiang Yu could finish, the entire river moon let out a loud roar. The body of the car also shook violently. The various steel structures made ear-piercing sounds as if they couldn't bear the weight. It felt like the river moon was about to break apart. "We might run into each other," Jiang Yu, who didn't have a physical body, said slowly when she saw that everyone was dizzy from the fall. "It's too late to warn." Su Xinxing awkwardly got up from Chihaya Fukuyama. The latter had directly fainted when Su Xinxing headbutted him in the chest when he lost his balance. Fortunately, Chihaya Fukuyama's divinity still worked even though he had fainted. That was too exciting. Qin Xinyan stood up with his hand on the door handle. From his dazed expression, it seemed that he was still dizzy. "I'll just stay on Earth and play with flying swords in the future. Transdimensional trains and whatnot don't seem to fit my style as a cultivator. It's not a world fragment." Emily poked his head out of the window. After looking around, he shrank back and said to Su Xinxing, "It's a spaceship." Nonsense, there were all kinds of emergency lights and air valves outside. One look and you could tell that they weren't natural products. Su Xinxing rubbed his temples. In short, Jiang Yu's head seemed to have plunged into a strange man-made object that looked like a spaceship. To put it in simpler terms, the situation seemed to have become more troublesome again. Chapter 224. Su Xinxing scratched his head and planned to let Jiang Yu drive the train out of this place, but when he turned around, he found that the girl had disappeared. It seemed that before Jiang Yu could appear again, he would have to wait for quite some time. What should we do now? Qin Xinyan hugged the unconscious Chihaya Fukuyama and asked Su Xinxing. In short, it seems that we can only look at the spatial structure of this place. Su Shinshin thought for a moment, then stretched out his right hand and tried to summon the holy sword Rolander. If he could summon the holy sword, then all he had to do was to let Emily try to locate Sakura Apartments, then use teleportation, physics, and everyone could return to Earth. Although this would affect the stability of the space where Earth was located, it was still within the realm of self-repair. However, before the holy sword appeared, the space let out a sound like glass shattering. Well, he sighed with a helpless expression, it seems that the spatial structure is not stable, it was the same as the lattice world. No, this strange world independent of the sea of ether was even more fragile than the lattice world. For example, it was like a soap bubble, it felt like it would burst with just a little bit of force. For this reason, Su Shinshin had no choice but to cancel the summoning of the holy sword. If the space broke, Su Shinshin would be fine. Emily should be able to survive until Su Shinshin found him. At most, he would accidentally destroy a few trillion worlds, mainly depending on when Su Shinshin could find him, but Qin Xinyan and the rest would probably be lost in space. Anyway, let's see what kind of place this is. After bringing Qin Xinyan and the rest down the train, Su Shinshin turned around and looked at the river moon with a frown. He asked Xinyan a dream who was carrying Chihaya Fukuyama, is there any way to put the river moon away? It feels weird to leave it here. As a hero, Su Shinshin used to have spatial equipment, but after he sealed all of Emily's magic, he couldn't use any magic items because they would overload and burn in his hands. On the other hand, the storage space that Jasmine had created using her spatial magic was, on the bright side, sometimes ineffective. On the bright side, it was like an extra-dimensional trash bin. The things that were thrown into it could not be retrieved. Su Shinshin had once brought back a small bag of gold coins from Aurovia, intending to use it to improve his life, but it had disappeared just like that. Let me try. Qin Xinyan was a little unsure. But I always feel that the Tao of this place is not quite the same as that of our world. I don't know if my heaven and earth Luopan is still useful. As he spoke, Qin Xinyan took out a cheap handkerchief from his pocket and threw it at River Moon. The handkerchief swelled as the wind blew, and after a few breaths, it was big enough to wrap the locomotive. After wrapping River Moon, the handkerchief immediately shrunk, and in the end, it looked like the handkerchief was wrapped with a long nose. Su Shinshin stared at Shi Yangyang's dark eyes for a long time, and then sighed. Fortunately, River Moon doesn't know what a handkerchief is, or else she would probably want to kill herself. By the way, why did you choose this handkerchief? It's cheap. After living with you for so long, anyone would be infected with the stinginess disease. Qin Xinyan answered without hesitation. This made Su Shinshin reflect from the bottom of his heart whether he was really too stingy in the past. Objection Ali, Emily raised his small hand and protested expressionlessly. Shi Yangyang is quite interesting. Objection overruled. But it was instantly suppressed by Su Shinshin. After putting River Moon away, a large hole naturally appeared in the wall-like thing that was originally broken. Su Shinshin glanced outside and attached a sanctuary's protection to it. Outside is the Sea of Ether, and here is still in the gap between worlds. Although ether had similar descriptions in many worlds, it was actually a non-original free substance that was between energy and law, second only to the void. Unless one had a certain degree of dimensional affinity, void resistance, or self-consistent divinity, they would quickly be melted by the ether in the Sea of Ether and become a part of it. So, it's worth paying attention to who this spaceship that can exist independently in the Sea of Ether belongs to. While walking in the building, Su Xianxing quickly explained the Sea of Ether and their current situation, and concluded with this sentence. The one who responded to him was Qin Xinyan with a confused face. Obviously, the girl didn't understand much about the Sea of Ether. It's okay, Su Xianxing comforted her. To put it simply, what we need to do now is to find the owner of this spaceship and ask them to help send us back to Earth. Or if they refuse, beat them up and ask them to send us back. Oh, you should have said that earlier. Why did you have to add a phrase that I've never heard of before? Qin Xinyan nodded to express that it was so easy. Don't mind it, I'm just showing off. This spaceship was clearly a scientific creation, and this made Su Xianxing very surprised. Compared to the mystical side, which was able to make an individual self-consistent, the scientific side relied more on the physical laws of the world it was in. Many times, although it wasn't much weaker than the scientific side in many aspects, and after a certain amount of accumulation, its explosive speed would far surpass the scientific side, but it was far weaker than the scientific side when it came to transmigrating between worlds. For example, the scientific side was like building a spaceship. They built a spaceship that was completely made of Gundam alloy and used to transmigrate between worlds. However, when the spaceship transmigrated to another world, because Gundam alloy didn't exist in the laws of the new world, the entire spaceship's material disintegrated at the atomic level due to the correction force of the world. It disappeared with a whoosh, leaving behind a confused astronaut sitting in the pilot's seat, holding half of the rubber cover of the joystick in his hand, slowly floating in the empty space of the universe. In comparison, as long as the mystical side's laws were self-consistent, even if a carbon-based creature transmigrated to a world without carbon elements, it wouldn't be directly erased by the correction force of the other world because it was a small world of its own. Even the most extreme correction force would at most throw it out of the world. Because of this, when Su Xianxing encountered creatures that could transmigrate between worlds, they were mostly mystical. This time, he unexpectedly encountered something that was clearly a scientific side, which made him very surprised. Although they encountered airtight doors along the way, to Su Xianxing, those doors were 20 centimeters thick and made of a super alloy that didn't exist on Earth. They were no different from the curtains at the entrance of a supermarket. After opening more than 10 airtight doors, Su Xianxing and the others finally encountered a living person. To be precise, it was a living person wearing a spacesuit, holding a weapon that looked like a water gun and pointing it at them nervously. What are you? Although the other party tried his best to pretend to be brave, the fear in his voice could not be concealed. However, it was normal when one thought about it. Anyone who saw a common face with a subtle receding hairline tearing open an alloy door as easily as tearing open a cabbage would probably doubt their outlook on life and fear the humanoid monster at the same time. I don't understand the language, Qin Xinyan frowned slightly. My telepathy has failed, unlike Su Xianxing's blessings of all races, although Qin Xinyan could understand the local language no matter which country he was in on Earth or the lattice world, he basically used telepathy to directly obtain the meaning of the other party's words. On the other hand, the targets that his telepathy did not work on, such as Su Xianxing and Moli, were not originally from the Celestial Empire. They were the type that spoke Chinese fluently. Until now, the girl had never encountered anyone that she could not communicate with. Therefore, when his telepathy failed for the first time, it was natural for him to be surprised. The clothes he's wearing seem to be able to isolate spiritual power. Su Xianxing was not surprised by this. He whispered. After all, they were a race that could travel through time and space. It was normal for them to have some special protective skills. To be honest, at first, I thought we would be greeted by at least a group of stormtroopers. In the end, there was only one person. Not good. Qin Xinyan, who was still carrying Chihaya Fukuyama behind his back, could only roll his eyes helplessly at Su Xinxing's antics. Don't be afraid. We're just travelers from another world. We just got into a small car accident. Su Xinxing tried to communicate with the other party. By the way, are you the only one here? Where are the other crew members? The other party obviously did not expect Su Xinxing to be able to speak their language. He was stunned for a moment. However, he quickly regained his composure. It seemed that his psychological quality was quite good. You're time travelers? I'm Lux from the Space Administration's patrol force. This is my ship. If it's convenient, can you show me your license? What the hell is the Space Administration? I've transmigrated so many times and I've never met them. This time, it was Su Xinxing's turn to be dumbfounded. I didn't know that transmigrating required a license. You're unregistered. Well, if you had reported your route, you wouldn't have collided with my ship like this. The man who called himself Lux let out a long sigh. Can I ask, what kind of place is the Space Administration? Su Xinxing thought for a while and asked a safer question. The other party was about to answer when at this time, a strange sound suddenly rang out. It was not transmitted through the air, but directly sounded in the minds of everyone present. It was somewhat similar to the cry of a whale on Earth. Damn it! Lux's expression changed. He put away his gun and ran toward a room that looked like the bridge of a ship. Chapter 225. What's wrong? Su Xinxing and the others subconsciously followed. What happened? There's a 4-yuan giant whale in the nearby world gap. I've been chasing it for a few days, but I didn't expect it to appear at this time, the humanoid creature who called himself Lux replied. 4-yuan giant whale? Could it be that there's a 5-hair shark or something? Su Xinxing was stunned and muttered to himself. You're thinking too much. Although it seemed that it could not understand the joking meaning in Su Xinxing's words, the other party still replied very seriously, 4-yuan giant whales are rare high-dimensional creatures that can appear in this dimension. Moreover, because they feed on information, especially the source information of worlds, they pose a huge threat to the stability of various worlds, so they're very dangerous beasts. As far as I know, this 4-yuan giant whale alone has caused the information of nearly 300 worlds to collapse. The other party's serious appearance made Su Xinxing embarrassed to say that because there were too many technical terms, he could not understand what he was talking about. However, one thing was certain, and that was that the 4-yuan giant whale seemed to be a very ferocious monster. Then are you observing it? Su Xinxing could not help but ask when he thought about how this person in front of him seemed to have been chasing the monster for a long time. No, I'm on a crusade against it, but this guy has lived for a long time and is very difficult to deal with. I couldn't catch up to it at all before, and it was already doing my best to not be shaken off by it. Because he was wearing a mask, Su Xinxing could not see Lux's expression, but from his tone, he seemed to have a headache about this. Since you're chasing it, shouldn't you be happy that it came to you on its own? Su Xinxing could not help but ask. Lux paid attention to the various information displayed on the interface while replying in a slightly complaining tone, that's right. But when you crashed into my spaceship just now, you directly destroyed the weapon system on my spaceship. That guy has already sensed the information disturbance on my side and plans to take advantage of this to take revenge. After figuring out what happened, Su Xingxing began to explain to Qin Xingyan and Chihaya Fukuyama, who didn't understand Lux's language. To put it simply, when a hunter was chasing a dangerous beast, his tendons were smashed by a brick from the sky. Therefore, the dangerous beast that was running away with its tail between its legs took the opportunity to come back and take revenge. We are the brick that caused the accident. After listening to Su Xingxing's words, Qin Xingyan held his chin and pondered for a long time. Then he raised his head and asked, "How can a brick break a person's limbs?" "Miss, you're focusing on the wrong thing. Then let's just treat it as a high-level paraplegic, okay?" Su Xingxing spread out his hands and helplessly corrected himself. "Mr. Su, can you defeat that monster?" In comparison, Chihaya Fukuyama's problem was much more realistic. "I don't know. I'll only know after I fight it." Because he had never fought with a higher dimensional creature before, Su Xingxing didn't know the difference between this thing and a normal monster. Damn it, why is there still noise coming from the main control panel at this time? The nanomachines should have already fixed the main control panel. Lux quickly operated the control panel and anxiously muttered to himself. "Emily, don't use other people's computers to play Serum and Snake." Thus, Su Xingxing hurriedly pulled Jasmine down from the side. "Is there such a game program in my executive ship's control panel?" Lux stared blankly at the game screen that was still open and muttered to himself. The giant whale's roar came again. Although the high-frequency roar was similar to a mental attack, Qin Xingyan and Chihaya Fukuyama still subconsciously covered their ears with a pained expression. This couldn't go on. Su Xingxing wondered if he should find a chance to jump out of the spaceship and see if he could stab the monster to death with his sword. At this time, Lux's happy voice came from the mask. "The nanomachines have fixed the space-time coordinate warp engine. We're going to warp away. You guys find something to hug so that you don't fall." Chihaya Fukuyama, who was hugging the bulge beside the cabin, looked at Su Xingxing and Emily, who were hugging each other skillfully. He couldn't help but mutter, "I feel that your way of thinking is wrong." But before he finished speaking, the warp began. Compared to the River Moon's slow acceleration and then a sudden jump out of the world, Lux's spaceship's in-place warp was much more advanced and intense. Everyone felt like they were on a roller coaster, weightlessness and acceleration alternating. If it weren't for the fact that everyone present had outstanding physiques, and Lux, who was the only one who looked like a normal person, was wearing something like a spacesuit, even if he vomited in it, no one would be able to tell. He would have been half dead by now. Qin Xingyan even took the time to mutter, "This high-level paraplegic is pretty good at running." Su Xingxing. In the end, they could see from the front of the spaceship that they didn't know if it was a window or a large display screen. The spaceship had warped to the top of a bright red planet, and then it was caught by the planet's gravity and suddenly fell. Even if Lux wanted to operate the spaceship to escape the planet's gravity, it could not do so. The newly repaired engine was already on fire again, and a burnt smell could be smelled from the bridge. Well, at least we don't have to worry about the four-element giant whale chasing after us. In the end, Lux shrugged as if he had given up on treatment. That guy usually only wanders in the sea of ether, and basically won't appear in the world. After that, the spaceship plunged into the planet's surface with a bang. Thankfully, the spaceship was quite sturdy. Even if the cosplay meteorite came crashing down, the spaceship did not completely fall apart. Most of the outer insulation layer was blown away, and half of the balance wing was broken. Generally speaking, the spaceship was still intact, and it even landed in the end. Sushinshing, no, that's usually called crashing, right? At that time, the shock absorbers and buffering devices also worked, so that everyone in the bridge did not need to undergo a toughness check. Failing the check would result in broken limbs. The air of this planet is not suitable for the survival of my race. It seems that we can only go out in life support suits. I have some spare life support devices here, you guys. Before he finished speaking, Lux saw from the spare display screen that Su Xingxing had run out of the spaceship with a group of girls. God knows when this guy found the hatch. Chapter 226. The world outside the cabin was a barren land somewhat similar to Mars. The air was a little thin. Although there was oxygen, its proportion in the atmosphere was not high. Perhaps it was because it was daytime, but the temperature in the atmosphere was very high. According to Su Xingxing's physical senses, the temperature was probably close to 50 degrees Celsius. The ground was so hot that it could fry an egg on it. Obviously, this was not a natural environment that normal Earthlings could live in. Fortunately, there were no ordinary people in Su Xingxing's group. Putting aside Su Xingxing and Emily, who could use lava as a bathhouse, Qin Xingyan, as a cultivator, also had a very strong body. To make her feel hot, it had to be at least 300 degrees Celsius. Even though she had not opened the celestial bridge and reached the point where she could generate her own spirit energy, she could pretend to be dead for 3 to 5 days if she simply held her breath. This environment was far from harsh for her. Xingyan, can you still hold on? Of course, even so, Su Xingxing still asked for the time being. I'm fine. My master once threw me to the moon during my cultivation. Compared to that place, this place is quite comfortable. Qin Xingyan waved her hand, indicating that she was fine. The moon? Is the competition in the cultivation world now so harsh? Su Xingxing blinked, somewhat in disbelief. Of course. Nowadays, preschool-age Taoist children have to do 1 lesson, 3 exercises, Taoist edition, after morning classes every day. Coupled with the lack of spirit energy in modern times, every cultivator feels a lot of pressure before they graduate from their master's apprenticeship. It's common for cultivators to give gifts so that they can go to various secret realms for tutoring. In any case, our Bailu temple is rich, but back then, it cost my master 0.5 kilogram of spirit stones to send me to the moon, which made him feel distressed for several years. Why does your cultivation of the Jindan stage feel like you're going to the children's palace for tutoring? Su Xingxing listened in a daze. Compared to Qin Xingyan, Chihaya Fukuyama was much more normal. She had just turned from a normal human into a god. Although she knew that her physical condition was far better than most of the creatures on Earth, including the tardigrades, and that she could even survive without breathing, she still found it hard to breathe after using her lungs for more than 10 years when she suddenly came to a place with thin air. In addition, the intense heat caused Chiyo's forehead to be covered in sweat due to the psychological effects. Do you need my help? Because Chihaya had taken care of her a lot during her time in Fusang, Emily couldn't help but ask when he saw her like this. Are you going to give me a barrier or something? That's great. Chihaya Fukuyama wiped the sweat off his forehead and heaved a sigh of relief. I'll use magic to transform the ecosystem. First, I'll strengthen and improve the atmosphere of this planet. Stop it. The scale of the impact is too big. Chihaya Fukuyama knelt down. Setting aside the interaction between the superhumans in Sakura apartment for the time being, after a while, Lux, who was wearing a spacesuit-like suit, rushed over, panting. I say, can you guys be a little more careful? At least wait until I'm done with the basic environmental monitoring before coming out. He complained to Su Xinxing and the others a little frantically. Even if it's not for your own personal safety, you have to think about the ecological balance of this planet. Who knows, maybe a sneeze from you guys could cause the extinction of the species here. There's life on this planet? Su Xinxing looked at the barren land around him and couldn't help but show a look of suspicion. It wasn't just the surrounding area. When they landed, the planet was also bright red from space. There was no sign of an ocean or even water at all. Don't underestimate the potential of life. Although this world is an outside world, there are also records of this world in the administration's infinite library. Lux took out an object that looked like a pad and operated it. He then said, not only is there life on this planet, but after inspection, it's a level 2 intelligent creature. After hearing what he said, Su Xinxing raised his head and looked around again, but he still saw nothing. Even if he released his senses, let alone intelligent creatures, he couldn't even sense the aura of ordinary life at all. You're not kidding, right? Those life forms aren't on the surface. Lux said seriously. At first, they were a kind of moss-like semi-fungal creature that lived in dark caves. Later, because the desertification on the surface of this planet became more and more serious, even the caves began to dry up. They were forced to evolve into animals that could move their own positions. After the underground water and underground karst caves were excavated, the evolution speed of these creatures began to accelerate, and social groups appeared. Now they have their own language and writing, so they can be said to be a civilized race. By the way, almost all of these guys look like this. Lux placed his pad flat like a base, then a three-dimensional projection appeared on it. It looks delicious. It might be good for stewing chicken. Su Xinxing looked at the three-dimensional projection for a long time, then said with some uncertainty. Judging from the three-dimensional projection, the race Lux mentioned seemed to be a kind of mushroom people, and it seemed to be closer to shiitake mushrooms. Mr. Su, do you want to eat that kind of thing? Chihaya Fukuyama couldn't help but feel speechless. Emily and I have eaten madango before. Su Xinxing closed his eyes and recalled the taste. It has a special flavor when used to cook hot pot. What kind of life did you guys live before? This thing, if placed on Earth, it would definitely be treated as a shiitake mushroom spirit. Su Xinxing, who was embarrassed to say that it was because he was poor, awkwardly changed the topic. Don't joke around, there are no fruits or vegetables on Earth that have become spirits, okay? Qin Xinyan said with a serious face. Because almost all of them are stewed before they have intelligence. I seem to have read this in a book before. Su Xinxing was speechless for a long time before he muttered. It's okay, I've already controlled the number of words to the extent that we can win in court. No, that's not the problem, okay? Su Xinxing complained in his mind. Chihaya Fukuyama pulled the corner of Su Xinxing's shirt. Mr. Su, I think it's better if you ask the owner of the spaceship when we can leave here. That's true. Therefore, Su Xinxing stopped Emily, who wanted to dig a hole and see how the mushroom people lived underground, and asked Lux, when can we leave here? The nanomachines sent a report back saying that there aren't enough materials to repair the spaceship. Lux spread his hands and took out a small pistol from behind his butt. In short, we have to collect some materials for temporary repair of the spaceship first. Okay, is it the endless space now? Su Xinxing rubbed his forehead with a headache. That's a crappy game, Emily said with a straight face. Why do you know about it, Emily? Wait, speaking of which, I seem to remember that 158 yuan disappeared from my card for no reason. Hey, don't look away, look at me. And don't whistle. If you don't know how to whistle, don't pretend like you do. Although I don't know what's going on, Mr. Su seems to be having a hard time. Qin Xinyan said sympathetically. Chihaya Fukuyama also nodded with sympathy. Chapter 227. Unlike what Su Xinxing and the others had expected, Luke didn't run around the planet mining trees or anything. He just used that strange little pistol to casually scan the surroundings and was done with it. That's it? Su Xinxing asked in disbelief. Oh, your civilization is still stuck at the pure mass energy stage, that's why you're surprised. Lux removed the cartridge from the pistol and stuffed it into his pocket. Could it be that the civilization of your hometown has reached a higher level? Su Xinxing asked curiously. Among the many lattice worlds he had transmigrated to, there were worlds that specialized in natural science and technology. Even though they had been plowed by the Demon King's army, the level of technology left behind was still much higher than Earth's. Even so, the highest level of civilization Su Xinxing had seen was only using photon energy, which was a more mysterious energy source, to create giant robots similar to the Mano-Z. There was still no system beyond mass energy civilization. No, my hometown is also only at the mass energy stage. It has just entered the space age not long ago. Even the star system of the origin planet hasn't been explored yet. Lux's answer was unexpected. Huh? Could a civilization of this level build a spaceship? Even the space civilization in the Centaurus constellation that was involved in a civil war couldn't build something like this. You're probably mistaken. Lux looked at the pad in his hand as he explained to them. Su Xinxing, Qin Xinyan, and Chihaya Fukuyama couldn't understand his language. The space administration wasn't built by my civilization, it's just that my civilization's world happened to be within the jurisdiction of the space administration, and I happen to have a certain level of talent. That's why I was chosen to be the administrator of the space administration. Is that so? Su Xinxing nodded and made an understanding expression. At the same time, he categorized the information that the Space Administration was an organization that spanned across multiple worlds into something more important. It might come in handy in the future. That's right. Lux naturally didn't know what Su Xinxing was thinking. He continued, the origin world of the Space Administration, Midgard, is a civilization that developed science and mystery side by side. They believe that everything in the world, be it energy or matter, is a product built on information. The reason why so many people in the world look similar is because the information between the worlds reflects each other. Other than that, they believe that the void and its products will consume and destroy the flow of information. Therefore, the inhabitants of that world transformed themselves into a higher being between the soul and the origin of the world. They built the Space Administration to expel the void and control and limit the loss of information. As Su Xinxing listened to Lux, he looked at Emily with a complicated expression. Then, he pretended that the language of your world was very difficult. There were too many nouns in your language and I couldn't understand a thing. For example, Lux looked around and bent down to pick up a stone from the ground. There's a stone here. Almost every living thing needs to know about this stone through various information, the color of the reflected light wave, the volume and chemical/physical properties of the smallest unit of particles, the relative mass due to the gravitational force of the planet, the temperature caused by the movement of the particles and so on. Then, the question is, what will happen when I gather all the information? As he spoke, he threw the stone away, opened his left hand, took out his pistol with his right hand and fired a shot into his left palm. Then, something that looked exactly like the stone from before appeared in his palm. That's about it. As Su Xinxing translated for Qin Xingyan and Chihaya Fukuyama, he frowned slightly. Among the people he had met, there were some who could create things out of thin air. He had even pulled the beard of the self-proclaimed god of creation. However, this was the first time he had seen such a strange creation process and theory. And according to the other party's theory, then, if you gather all the information of a specific person, can you even create a person? Since the other party seemed to be easy to talk to, Su Xinxing decided to ask the question that had been bothering him for a long time. In theory, it's possible. However, because life interacts with the environment, it causes huge fluctuations in information. Copying an ordinary creature, especially an intelligent one, sometimes requires more information than copying a planet. In addition, the more outstanding the person, the more influence they have on the outside world, or the more special the ability they have, the more information they need to copy. Lux nodded, then waved the small pistol in his hand. The maximum amount of information my executive gun can use is the amount of information needed to copy a standard human model. As he spoke, he pointed the pistol at Su Xinxing. Then, the pistol exploded with a bang. Qin Xingyan and the others, who were still surprised by Lux's ability to create things, were startled. Ahem. What's going on? Luke blew out a black smoke ring from his filter. Looking at the pistol in his hand, which only had a handle left, he was as dumbfounded as the others. I just wanted to scan your information. If it wasn't for the fact that he was still wearing his combat suit, he would have been injured just now. Even so, half of the protective suit was blasted black. Judging from the electrical sparks that came out of the various external devices, the explosion probably caused quite a bit of damage. Su Xinxing was instantly amused. It seems that I have quite a lot of information. Stop fooling around, there's probably a problem with the gun. Lux obviously disagreed with Su Xinxing. Although the information limit can only copy a standard human model, the scanning limit of my gun can reach an entire standard world. Even if it's a world with an overload of 1 or 2, it will at most show an overload. How can it explode? Su Xinxing thought about it and felt that Lux's meaning was more or less the same. Although a bank card could only withdraw tens of thousands of yuan at a time from an ATM machine, it did not prevent it from storing billions of yuan. Therefore, he thought that one person might not explode, but the problem was that there were more than 2 people here. What if the gun explodes? It's okay, I've already collected enough information. We just have to return to the ship. Lux patted his waist bag, indicating that he was already prepared. At this moment, a long whale's roar resounded in everyone's hearts. F*CK, that guy actually caught up. Let's retreat. Lux was stunned for a moment, then he was the first to react. He immediately ran toward the spaceship. Then, he was easily overtaken by a group of superhumans. When he ran to the cabin door, panting, Su Xinxing and the others were already yawning. Chapter 228. Su Xinxing looked at Luke, who inserted the cartridge clip into the spaceship's control panel and quickly operated something on it. Su Xinxing suddenly asked, speaking of which, are you sure that the 4-element giant whale will follow us when we leave this world? Lux paused for a second and looked back at Su Xinxing. Although he was confused by this guy's question, he still answered truthfully, it should be, right? After all, that guy is chasing me for revenge. Yeah, and now that the enemy is in high paraplegia, Qin Xinyan added. Can we not talk about high paraplegia? As the owner of the high paraplegia spaceship, Lux protested helplessly. That's true, but didn't you say before that the monster feeds on information about the world's roots? If we leave this world, will it really give up on the temptation of this cake that's right in front of it? Lux thought for a second, then asked in confusion, what is cake? It seemed that there was no such thing as cake in the world Lux was born in. Therefore, cultural differences were unavoidable when communicating with people from another world. It's so sad, life is incomplete without cake. Qin Xinyan looked at Lux with pity. Exactly, it can be said that half of the fun in life is gone. Chihaya Fukuyama also nodded in agreement. So sad, I can't help but cry. Emily added on expressionlessly. More than half of your life is made up of sweets, Su Xinxin complained in his mind. Although Emily often asked him to buy sweets, he didn't eat sweets himself, so he couldn't understand the feelings of the female group, mainly because they were poor. I know, it's some kind of food, right? Don't look at me with those gentle eyes, my lungs hurt. Lux's face twitched under the life support mask as he shouted in despair. By the way, do people on your planet use their lungs to feel the malice of the world? Su Xinxin, who was watching from the sidelines, finally couldn't help but speak up and drag the topic back on track. In short, since you treat that giant whale as a hunting target, it means that even if it has intelligence, it's probably only at the level of a beast, right? He asked in a rare serious tone. To be honest, I don't think ordinary beasts can resist the temptation of food close at hand and chase other prey, even if the other prey has a grudge against it. What you said makes sense, but unfortunately, it's meaningless. Upon seeing this, Lux also said in a serious tone, indeed, under such circumstances, the possibility of the four-element giant whale attacking this world is very high. Unfortunately, we don't have the ability to stop it. Thanks to the brick of my spaceship, no, thanks to your shuttle, most of the systems on my spaceship, including the weapon system, are offline. Being able to extract information and perform emergency engine repair without affecting the stability of the world is already the limit. After a pause, he looked at Su Xinxin, whose expression didn't change much, and continued, although I don't want to admit it, this time it is indeed us. Well, it's mainly me who brought disaster to this world. This is my dereliction of duty as the executive officer. Now, other than hurrying back to Midgard to seek help from the Space Administration, there is no other way. For a moment, the entire bridge was silent. The spaceship slowly ascended under the autopilot of the main computer, and a somewhat rigid synthetic female voice was constantly reporting the altitude and the status of the spaceship's self-inspection. They planned to take off at a specific altitude and then proceed to warp. Suddenly, Emily looked up at the display above the bridge and said softly, "It's here." Everyone, including Lux, instinctively looked at the screen. Because they had not yet left the planet's atmosphere, the flight altitude was not particularly high, so at first glance, it was still crimson red. However, in the next moment, there was something out of place in this crimson red. Space seemed to be covered by something transparent, and there was a dizzying and nauseating feeling of distortion. Then, the bright red ground began to collapse on a large scale. The collapsed surface was not blown away, nor did it collapse. Instead, after the collapse, it disappeared before everyone's eyes, revealing a dark blue cavern hidden under the surface. The cavern was filled with some kind of yellowish-green secretion, and it was a huge strange building that looked like a snail's shell. That should be the city of the native mushroom people of this world that Lux mentioned before. The mushroom people's dome was affected by the attack of the four-element giant whale and was also swallowed. To be precise, the information about it was swallowed. Now, other than us, no one in this world, including the mushroom people, remembers that they originally had a dome on their heads. Lux's voice was completely different from before, and it sounded a little gloomy. It seemed that he also had some bad memories of the four-element giant whale. After the surface collapsed and the dome disappeared, a strange black flame appeared in the city of the mushroom people. The mushroom people, who were almost 2 meters tall and looked more like giant white jellyfish than humans, also appeared in the vision of Su Xinxing and the others. These native residents spewed bright yellow body fluids at the black flame, as if trying to extinguish the flames. But it was obvious that the strange black flame was not a real flame. Instead of saying it was burning, it was more like a phenomenon that appeared for some special reason. After swallowing many of the snail shell houses and the mushroom people, the black flame became more vigorous, and the flame itself would occasionally stutter and flicker, which further proved that the black flame was not a real flame. The graphics cards of this world are outdated, aren't they? Su Xinxing looked at the series of color blocks that kept appearing on the black flame, and could not help but wonder. That's a bug caused by the information conflicts and errors when the world's laws operate after a large amount of the world's information has been swallowed. Before the world's consciousness corrects the errors, this bug is difficult to eliminate, and when the number of bugs reaches a certain level, the world will collapse. Lux explained to Su Xinxing and the others in a deep voice. This is why the Space Administration wants to eliminate the four-element giant whale. These guys from the higher dimensions are too dangerous for our world. Chapter 229. Logically speaking, the current situation was not something that could be solved by Su Xinxing taking out his great sword. First of all, in order for Lux's spaceship to be able to travel between worlds, its laws were self-consistent. The internal space formed a small world of its own. This was also the reason why when Su Xinxing summoned the Holy Sword of the End, the space cracked. Even if Su Xinxing did not care about Lux's spaceship and forcibly took the sword, it was not impossible. The problem was that until now, he had not been able to capture the location of the four-yuan giant whale. It was like a sharpshooter who could kill a Japanese machine gunner from 800 miles away with one shot. If he knew where the target was, he would naturally be able to kill it with one shot. However, the current situation was as if the higher-ups had suddenly given him an order to kill an invading alien. Damn! He knew where the Japanese were, but what the hell was an alien? Now, Su Xinxing had more or less the same feeling. In the end, he asked Mo Li with some uncertainty, "How about I try to attack the higher dimension directly?" The little girl shook her head. Then, probably because she thought it was too troublesome to explain, she simply shook her finger, causing lines of text and schematic diagrams to appear in front of Su Xinxing. This made Su Xinxing inexplicably think of the advanced mathematics exam paper that he had failed. Fortunately, the text explanation was concise and clear. After looking at it for a while, Su Xinxing understood Mo Li's meaning. According to Mo Li's speculation, Su Xinxing's Holy Sword of the End could attack a higher dimension. However, the trouble was that Su Xinxing himself had not practiced the relevant skills. His attack was likely to cause fatal damage to the higher dimension where the four-yuan giant whale was located. It could even cause the entire dimension to lose its dimensionality and fall. All dimensions above the three-dimensional dimension would be weakened by one dimension because of this, and the worst-hit four-dimensional world would directly crash into the three-dimensional world. The two dimensions collided with each other, and in the end, everything in the world would return to its original point and the dimension would be destroyed. To use a simpler example, in a skyscraper, Su Xinxing could cut from the first floor to the second floor, but he might cut down the load-bearing beams, which might lead to the collapse of the entire building, so I'm already this strong. Su Xinxing was stunned by Mo Li's words. It's just a possibility. Mo Li then replied, if there's only a 1% chance that the two dimensions will be destroyed together, would you try it, Mr. Landlord? Su Xinxing shook his head firmly. He had never held much hope for his luck. If it wasn't a last resort, he wouldn't do it even if there was only a 1% chance of causing dimensional extinction. Is there really no other way? Qin Xingyan asked with a frown as he looked at the surface of the planet that was gradually expanding. Su Xinxing translated her words to Lux. The latter spread out his hands and said, unless we have a powerful enough weapon, there's no other way. Wait a minute. Su Xinxing asked, the weapon you're talking about, what kind of weapon are you referring to? Is it a weapon that can attack higher dimensions? How is that possible? In theory, people from our dimension can't affect the existence of higher dimensions. Lux sighed, as if it was regretting that Su Xinxing didn't even know this common knowledge. Mo Li wrote in Chinese, so this guy couldn't understand it. What I need now is a highly destructive weapon that can quickly charge and fire, and maximize its power in a short period of time. In the Space Administration, there's a weapon called the Rainbow Light Cannon that can do the job, but unfortunately, with my priority sequence, it's not my turn to use that thing. Therefore, our humanoid weapon was very pleased. Why don't you let me try? Maybe I can do it. Su Xinxing said without hesitation as he patted his chest. You? Lux didn't believe that this person with small arms and legs could kill the four-element giant whale. Are you kidding me? Ha ha ha, this joke from another world isn't funny at all. Don't forget that I can smash your spaceship into a high paraplegic state with a brick. Su Xinxing curled his lips and said, I already said it's not a high paraplegic state. Forget it, let's talk about something else. Lux immediately began to change the topic. Stop fooling around. Anyway, you have a way to locate the whale, right? Su Xinxing didn't give him time to think and immediately asked. Lux was silent for a moment before he finally sighed, I do have a way, but they're all relatively old methods. After I received my own ship, I never used them again. Su Xinxing didn't expect this guy to actually have a way. After Mo Li translated his words, the people on the ship immediately became lively. Although Qin Xingyan and Chihaya Fukuyama said different things, the main meaning was similar. They both hoped that Su Xinxing could quickly solve the problem so that Lux could send them back to Earth. Other than Lux, no one had any objections to the proposition that Su Xinxing can kill the monster. Very well, after our discussion, we unanimously decided to help you kill the monster. Therefore, Su Xinxing directly laid his cards on the table with Lux. As the person involved, what do I think? Lux's voice sounded a little depressed. Don't worry, people from another world don't have human rights in our world. Su Xinxing replied with a serious face. I can't find any element of reassurance in this sentence at all. Although that was what he said, since he was asked to do so, rather than watch the world where the Mushroom Man lived be destroyed because of the four-element giant whale, Lux decided to trust Su Xinxing and this group of travelers from another world who mysteriously appeared on his ship. As I said before, the four-element giant whale is one of the few creatures that can enter our dimension from a higher dimension. That's right, the four-element giant whale isn't the only high-dimensional creature that can enter our dimension. There are also some relatively harmless types. The only one that can track down a high-dimensional creature is another type of high-dimensional creature. This is the method I'm talking about. Lux took out a jar of brown cat food from a space that looked like a storage cabinet under his control panel. The jar was covered with apricot yellow talismans that often appeared in zombie movies, which made this thing look quite out of place with the sci-fi style of the spaceship's bridge. This is a bait that can be used to lure those high-dimensional creatures. The talismans on it are used to isolate the scent. If you don't stick this thing on it, the creatures will notice the bait no matter where it is. After that, Lux put his hand on the lid of the jar, swallowed, and asked Su Xinxing and the others, "Are you ready?" Chapter 230. It's ready. Su Xinxing pulled Emoli, who had run over to try the cat food, back into his arms. He ignored the piercing glances from Qin Xinyan and the others and replied with a serious face. Lux did not suspect anything and opened the can. It then grabbed a handful of cat food and scattered it towards the ceiling. Space began to fluctuate in a manner that could be seen with the naked eye. Along with the ripples, translucent creatures that looked like flying fish jumped out of the water and shuttled back and forth in midair. However, Lux did not stop there. Instead, it continued to scatter cat food and attracted even more flying fish. This made Su Xinxing wonder if the so-called high-dimensional world was actually an ocean-like place. Otherwise, why would all the things that came out be aquatic? Suddenly, the flying fish looked as if they had been frightened. They started to run away in a panic. Not long after, the flying fish that were fighting for the bait all disappeared. Then, a smiling face appeared in front of everyone. Although this was somewhat unbelievable, a smiling face really did appear out of thin air. The eyes narrowed into the shape of crescent moons and the corners of the mouth curled up into a big grin. Immediately after, the bottom of the smiling face also appeared out of thin air. It was a round, furry cat face that was the size of a basin. Immediately after, the cat's body gradually appeared and floated in midair, ignoring the artificial gravity of the spaceship. Its orange-red fur was glossy and shiny, looking soft and dense, making people have the urge to touch it. A Cheshire cat? Chihaya Fukuyama looked at the cat's exaggerated smiling face and could not help but think of a famous character in a fairy tale. Although it did not understand Chihaya Fukuyama's words, Lux obviously understood something from her reaction. Have you heard of the legend of this cat? This should be one of the few high-dimensional creatures that have been clearly recorded in a large number of worlds. Okay, guys, after handing over the guest, you're leaving him hanging. Is this how you treat your guests? The big-faced cat grinned. Su Xinxing's eyes lit up. It didn't use sound to communicate, but like the four-element giant whale, its words sounded directly in people's hearts. Could it be that spiritual force was an ability commonly grasped by higher dimensional life forms? Thanks to this, the Cheshire cat seemed to be able to communicate with everyone regardless of the language they were speaking. Cheshire cat, we need your help, Lux said loudly. In fact, in his language, the name for this cat seemed to be a special noun, but in Su Xinxing's ears, this noun was directly translated as the Cheshire cat. You know, I've always been easy to talk to. What price do you propose to pay for my help? The cat made all kinds of swimming movements in the air, floating like a balloon. At the same time, it asked in a very pleasant voice. Lux raised the can of cat food. That is indeed a very rare thing, and it suits my taste. But it's not worth it for me to help you get close to that ferocious, non-cat-like behemoth. The Cheshire Cat did not seem to be particularly satisfied with the reward. Then how about adding a favor from the Space Administration? The other party's bargaining seemed to have been within Luke's expectations. Unhurriedly, Luke said, although the officers with a higher rank than me might not admit it, if you encounter any trouble in the future, at least I can lend a hand. For life forms in this dimension, a promise from an administrator of the Space Administration was very rare. Those civilizations that had just stepped into the super space-time era often did not hesitate to go bankrupt in exchange for a promise from an administrator of the Space Administration. Unfortunately, there were not many such opportunities. Those who could enter the Space Administration were all experienced old foxes. In addition, the administrators had their own behavior recording devices, so they would not betray the interests of the Space Administration for their own selfish reasons. Unfortunately, the Cheshire Cat was not a life form in this dimension. As a higher dimensional life form, even if it did not know everything about the lower dimensional world, it could be considered to know a lot about it. If I want a favor from you, I might as well ask for a favor from the two over there. So it grinned and used its tail to point to Su Xinxing and Emily who were acting as the background. Lux opened its mouth in disbelief. Fortunately, because of the mask, no one saw its exaggerated look of surprise. Could it be that in the eyes of the Cheshire Cat, the weight of the Space Administration was not as important as the two inexplicable space-time travelers? Although the way they appeared was indeed a bit strange, along the way, they did not show any special abilities. No, it must be that the Cheshire Cat felt that it was not as good as the two of them combined. It had nothing to do with the Space Administration. Su Xinxing and Emily looked at each other and felt that the cat did have some tricks up its sleeve. If it was just Emily who was sealed, then it would have been fine. After the Great Devil Realm opened up the 9,000 grid worlds, Su Xinxing was basically immune to all spying abilities. However, the other party was still able to detect the hidden power on their side. This could not be described as a coincidence. I mean, if you need help in the future, I can use the power of the Space Administration. Lux tried to explain to the Cheshire Cat that it was not alone, but there was a huge force like the Space Administration behind it. Yes, and we do not intend to give you two favors because of one thing. Su Xinxing also nodded and pouted in the direction of Lux, urging, "It is more cost-effective over there, isn't it?" After all, whether it was Su Xinxing or Emily, if they were serious, they would cause a greater impact than the 4-yuan giant whale, not to mention the two of them together. The Cheshire Cat looked at Lux and then looked at Su Xinxing. "I see. Although it is a pity that I can't get a favor from both of you at the same time, it is a rare opportunity. Then I only want a favor from you." Did he not fall into the trap? What a cunning guy! Su Xinxing pursed his lips imperceptibly. He would rather get a favor from one person than a promise from this side? Lux looked at the Cheshire Cat in surprise, then turned back to look at Su Xinxing. Thinking of the explosion that occurred when his deacon gun scanned Su Xinxing's information, a vague guess emerged in his mind. Chapter 231. But then again, how can you help us determine the location of the 4-yuan giant whale? Su Shinxing asked as he looked at the big orange cat with a slightly suspicious look. The Cheshire Cat showed his signature suspicious smile. He knew that Su Shinxing's question meant that he had agreed to the condition he had proposed. I will make it appear in this dimension in a visible state. But you'd better hurry up and get rid of it. After all, even if we are creatures of the same dimension, there is still a huge gap between us. The time I can be of use is extremely limited. How long? Su Shinxing, who had been fooled by such ambiguous words, immediately asked cautiously, how long? Although he didn't know what the Four Elements great whale looked like, as long as he had about 3 seconds, even Godzilla and Su Shinxing could cut it down for him to see. In terms of time measurement that you can understand, 5 minutes. The Cheshire Cat calculated and then answered. It seemed that there was more than enough time. The only thing left was to take action. Su Shinxing, who was now more confident, said to Lux, who was still in a daze, open your hatch. I want to go outside. If Su Shinxing wanted to kill a monster that could destroy the world with his bare hands, it would be a little troublesome even for him. After all, monsters that wanted to cause trouble for the world basically had some tricks up their sleeves. However, if he could use the sacred sword, the difficulty would be reduced by a lot. In fact, up until now, after Su Shinxing had mastered the divine arts, there were only 2 people who could survive when he pulled out the holy sword. The current situation was somewhat out of Su Shinxing's control. In the face of the Foryuan giant whale, a monster that could travel between 2 dimensions, ordinary attacks were basically useless. If there wasn't a powerful enough attack to heavily injure or kill it in one strike, the other party could take the opportunity to flee into a dimensional crack and escape to a higher dimensional world, making it impossible for Su Shinxing and the others to catch up. Therefore, the most important thing was to be able to destroy the enemy in one breath. If he stayed in the spaceship, Su Shinxing could also transmit his strength through some combat methods similar to hitting a cow across a mountain. However, this would be a big problem in terms of accuracy and damage. Instead of relying on luck, he might as well use the holy sword to kill the monster. It was simple and fast. However, as mentioned before, the fragile space in the spaceship could not withstand Su Shinxing's holy sword of the end, Roland Dur. Therefore, if he wanted to use the holy sword, he could only go outside. Although the Mushroom Man's world outside was not necessarily sturdier, at least this kind of naturally formed world, and the universe was quite vast. Putting aside when the spaceship landed on that planet just now, we are now close to the edge of the atmosphere. The air pressure outside the spaceship is very low. If you go out now, you will soon die from pressure loss. Lux sternly refused. Now that things have come to this, I won't ask you to give up this idea, but how about you at least wear a suit first? Just like a deep-sea fish that was fished out of the water, if an ordinary creature was suddenly thrown into space from standard atmospheric pressure, even if they didn't die from the various kinds of radiation that filled space, they would still die due to the loss of pressure and the pressure inside their body bursting their internal organs. Although they had not officially entered the universe yet, they were almost there. You don't have to care about me, Su Shinxing explained helplessly. Because of some reasons, my body is a little different from humans. Even in this situation, it won't affect me too much. It had to be known that not only had Su Shinxing destroyed an entire fleet alone in the universe, but he had even been blasted into a star before escaping alive. In comparison, what he was about to experience now was much more child's play. Lux considered for a long time, but in the end, he could not persuade Su Shinxing. He could only sigh and say, Good luck. After climbing out of the spaceship, Su Xinxing climbed out of the spaceship and climbed to the top of the spaceship. It was different from the scene he had imagined at the beginning. Because there was not much air left, it was unexpectedly quiet, giving off a feeling of death. Raising his head slightly, he could see the huge bright red planet in front of him. Even though Su Xinxing had seen this scene many times, he still felt that this scene was very spectacular. "Where is that thing?" he asked the Cheshire Cat beside him. As a high-dimensional creature, this big orange cat that was as fat as Garfield did not seem to need oxygen to survive. However, after he opened his mouth, he realized that he was being silly. If there was no air, his voice would naturally not be transmitted to the other party. Fortunately, the Cheshire Cat noticed his expression and seemed to understand what Su Xinxing was talking about. He simply continued to reply telepathically, "Wait a little longer. Soon, we will be able to see the back of the planet. That is where the disaster area is." Originally, Su Xinxing wanted to ask what the disaster area meant. However, it did not take long for him to understand even if he did not ask. As the spaceship flew around the planet in low Earth orbit for a while, the devastated back of the planet was reflected in Su Xinxing's eyes. Originally, he thought that the scene he saw on the planet was the greatest damage that the Foryuan giant whale could cause. After all, destroying the world seemed a little far away, although Emily had been shouting that, and there was almost no visual representation. However, after seeing the back of the planet, Su Xinxing realized that he was too naive. The back of the Scarlet Planet was full of craters that could be seen even from low Earth orbit. The largest of them even occupied nearly 1/20th of the planet's surface. If one looked carefully, they could even see that the entire interior of the planet had been hollowed out. This was a very incredible situation. Generally speaking, if a planet was really hollowed out, then regardless of what changes would happen during the hollowing out process, the hollowed out planet would soon fall apart due to the lack of sufficient gravity and the lack of crustal strength. It would then become a new group of meteorite belts. However, the Scarlet Planet was still operating, like a corpse that did not notice that it had died. Chapter 232. The deep, dark crater was particularly eye-catching against the bright red surface of the planet, not to mention the black fire bugs that covered almost the entire planet like a spider web. "I'll lure it out. You watch carefully. If you can't get rid of it, I'll be in big trouble." The big orange cat used telepathy to talk to Su Xinxing. Then its figure began to fade and become translucent. Only the big face with a strange smile remained in midair, and finally, it gradually disappeared. Su Xinxing took a deep breath, and then found that there was no air here for him to do so. So he leaned forward slightly in disappointment. His left hand continued to hold on to the spaceship's heat shield to prevent himself from being blown away by the explosion or other reasons. His right hand was behind his back, clenched into a fist, and made a sword-drawing gesture, waiting for the enemy to appear. Since returning from the great demonic realm, he had hardly used the holy sword seriously. Even when he fought against the old monster from the Yellow Springs on Earth, it was only a single sword strike. But now, the enemy he was facing was obviously much stronger. Although he had seen people or things that could destroy a planet with a single blow, he had never encountered someone who could empty a planet in just a few minutes. This kind of technology was much more difficult than destroying a planet. Not only him, but even the few people in the spaceship were shocked by the tragic state of the Scarlet Planet on the screen. Only Emily was still nonchalantly searching for something that looked like a small biscuit in a small cabinet under the console. He tried a bite with interest, and then his face changed drastically. He spat it all over the floor. "It's here," a mysterious, indescribable feeling lifted Su Xinxing's spirit. If he had to make an analogy, it was probably similar to the feeling of an electric shock. He looked in the direction where the feeling came from. Unsurprisingly, it was the giant crater on the back of the Scarlet Planet. Just when Su Xinxing thought that a huge whale would fly out of the crater, the darkness in the crater slowly opened from both sides. A huge eye occupied almost the entire crater, and from the bottom of it, it stared at the Lux spaceship in low Earth orbit with an inorganic gaze. This is really, even Su Xinxing was a little dazed for a moment. The Scarlet Planet was much larger than Earth, but even if it was converted to Earth's surface area, the eye that occupied almost 5% of the planet was the size of 2 half-dynasties. Also, Su Xinxing's battle instincts told him that the enemy was not a species whose eyes were the real body like the eye devils. Since it was called the four-element whale, its appearance should indeed be similar to a whale, or at least similar to a fish. Due to the dimension problem, even if it was instantiated to this world, just the eye portion alone was enough to fill up the hollowed-out dark red planet. No, this isn't the 4-yuan giant whale that I hunted before. The one I was chasing was just an ordinary individual, but this one is definitely an ancient species. Within the bridge, Lux was somewhat flustered as he said, only a senior officer would be able to deal with such a high-dimensional monster. Even if my ship is equipped with the rainbow cannon, it's still not a match for it. He clenched his teeth, a resolute expression appearing on his face. "You guys go and get that fellow to hurry back. We're preparing to escape through hyperdrive. I hope that after emergency repairs, the spiritual stoves will be able to withstand this kind of hyperdrive." Because Qin Xingyan and Chihaya Fukuyama couldn't understand Luxa's words, Luxa's previous words were directed at Emily. The girl took out a bottle of mineral water from who knows where. After rinsing her mouth, she replied, "No need. Now isn't the time to be stubborn." Lux was already operating on the interface. "Damn it, it's already at the critical point. Just the other side's gaze is enough to cause the amount of information here to explode to such an extent. I already said that there's no need." Having been ignored by the other side, Emily snapped his fingers in a somewhat awkward manner. As a result, the spaceship emitted a strange sound effect similar to that of a comedy movie, before directly shutting down. "What did you do?" Lux looked at the disconnected engine and spiritual stoves on the interface, and couldn't help but ask anxiously. "A cricket is a big fish. Let's see if Mr. Landlord takes it back to make soup." Emily didn't answer Lux's question. Instead, he looked at the screen. Because the emergency backup power had been switched, the information catcher and the screen outside could still function normally. "Our pot doesn't seem to be able to hold such a big fish," Qin Xingyan subconsciously muttered. "Is this the time to be concerned about the pot?" Chihaya Fukuyama, who had originally been extremely nervous because it was the first time he had encountered such a situation, was completely dispelled by Emily and Qin Xingyan's attitude. He couldn't help but feel a little powerless. Outside the bridge, Su Xinxing, who shouldn't have been able to hear the conversation inside, also smiled slightly. "Making soup. Unfortunately, I don't really like to eat fish." As he said this, countless streams of light gathered in his hands, as if he was holding the entire universe. Crackling sounds could be heard from the control panel in the bridge, and at the same time, countless electric sparks were emitted. This made Lux somewhat at a loss. The amount of information on our side is still exploding. What's going on? Even if it's being watched by an ancient species, it shouldn't have increased to this extent. Before he finished speaking, a burst of green smoke came out from the control panel, and a burnt smell filled the entire bridge. What kind of joke is this? The main control computer is different from the executive officer's gun. The information detection should reach hundreds of worlds. What the hell happened? Just now, more than the total amount of information of more than 100 worlds exploded here? Lux fell to the ground and looked at the almost destroyed control panel in disbelief. This business trip had a big impact on his worldview. Fortunately, everything was about to end. Standing at the top of the airship's bridge, Su Xinxing held the summoned holy sword of the end, Roland Dur, and looked at the huge eye in the distance. Although I don't know if your body has been instantiated to other places or is still in the higher dimension. But if I don't make a move, this world seems to be unable to hold on any longer. Because the four-element giant whale had gnawed on the world's origin information, this world was already somewhat unstable. After Su Xinxing took out the holy sword, the world groaned as if it could not bear the burden. But even so, it was much more stable than the lattice world. It's quite challenging to kill you without hurting the world. How long has it been since I was so serious? He waved the sword. There were no amazing light effects, nor were there any space cracks. It was just that the owner of the huge eye let out a sorrowful cry that could resound through all intelligent life in this world. The next moment, the world seemed to be reset. The huge eye disappeared, and the planet that had been gnawed and hollowed out returned to its original state. The black flames extinguished on their own, and the world's operation returned to normal. The world absorbed the monster's information and began to repair itself. How surprising! Su Xinxing waved his hand, and the holy sword disappeared. I thought at least this planet would be destroyed. After sighing, of course, it was just an action, Su Xinxing looked up at the bright red planet. As expected, blue is more beautiful. Chapter 233. I really have to thank all of you this time. Lux's executive ship quietly glided in the sea of ether, sailing towards the coordinates of Earth provided by Amoli. On the bridge, the owner of the ship warmly thanked Su Xinxing. I didn't expect such a big mess to happen in the end. You're welcome. After all, we were the ones who crashed into your ship in the beginning. Su Xinxing was a little indifferent about it. It was not because of the modesty of the people of the Celestial Empire. He just felt that it was not a big deal. After all, as a former hero, he had saved more than 9,000 lattice worlds and was a little numb to it. No, I have to thank you for that too. If you hadn't stopped my pursuit, I might have been the only one facing the ancient Foryuan giant whale. Lux smiled bitterly and shook his head. To be honest, even if the executive ship was fine, I didn't have much confidence that I could escape from it. I don't know how to thank all of you. It was simple to express his gratitude with RMB. Of course, Su Xinxing would only think about this in his head. He did not think that a civil servant running around in various worlds in the Sea of Ether would have the currency of a country ranked second on the third planet of a remote star system. Based on the information that Lux had found, the world where Earth was located was an unconfirmed world. In the world classification of the Space Administration, it belonged to the fourth category of worlds: Datum World, Sovereign World, Managed World, Unconfirmed World, Unknown World. That was to say, only the existence of that world was known, but they did not even have the time to conduct a general observation. I'm very satisfied that we don't have to pay for it. Su Xinxing sighed. He had a good impression of Lux, who was an understanding victim from another world. On Earth, even if they did not cause the accident, there would be people waiting to extort money from them. You don't have to thank us. Just send us back to Earth. But no matter what, all of you have helped me to solve the threat of the 4-yuan giant whale. If you were a citizen of a sovereign world, you would definitely be commended by the Space Administration and even get a noble title. Lux was still brooding over this. We have no interest in that kind of thing. It doesn't matter if you take all the credit. Su Xinxing shrugged, intending to end the conversation. For Su Xinxing, although the attack of the 4-element giant whale was indeed spectacular, he was only surprised by its strange ability to hollow out a planet. In terms of destructive power alone, during the war in the star kingdom of Trathine in the Centaurus galaxy, a battleship-class starship had the destructive power to destroy a planet. Even Su Xinxing had suffered a great loss. If not for the 4-element giant whale's unpredictable attacks from a higher dimension, this big fellow wouldn't even be ranked in the top 100 of Su Xinxing's enemies. Therefore, he did not really care about the honor he could get from defeating this monster. Of course, this was also related to the ridiculous rewards he had received in his previous life. Even though he had become the prince of the Star Ocean Kingdom of Telethian and had a lot of credits and privileges, he could only barely make ends meet on Earth. But then again, since the 4-element giant whale I killed wasn't the one you were chasing at the beginning, then in a sense, you are still in a more dangerous state, right? Su Xinxing suddenly thought of something and asked Lux, is it really okay to send us directly back to Earth? Why don't you go back to the Space Administration to repair your spaceship first, then send us back? Don't worry about it. The 4-element giant whale isn't very intelligent. After you killed an ancient species, the one I was chasing will definitely be scared and won't appear near us for a while. Lux was very optimistic about this. Su Xinxing thought for a while and felt that it was better not to jinx things. Recently, his words seemed to have a tendency of being both good and bad. Is your job always so dangerous? So he changed the topic. Not necessarily. It's not as peaceful as it used to be. At that time, it was said that as long as you were in the field, it was very dangerous. The Deacon ship might not be able to withstand the destruction of the violent ether sea. But 3 years ago, the situation suddenly took a turn for the better. The Bureau conducted a test and found that the biggest vortex that destroyed the balance of the ether sea suddenly disappeared. That's why the ether sea became so peaceful. Lux's tone sounded a little strange. It was unknown whether he was still scared or gloating. I passed the Deacon assessment 2 years ago, so I haven't experienced that kind of danger. But recently, the ether sea seems to be a little unstable. There weren't that many 4-element giant whales. Is that so? Su Xinxing thought about it carefully and realized that he didn't know what the other party was talking about, so he pretended to have an understanding expression and didn't continue the conversation. He decided to let this topic naturally transition to other topics. Ah, the world you want to go to is coming soon. Lux, who had been staring at the console, suddenly said. After the urgent repair of the nanomachines, the console was now barely restored to the point where it could be used. However, the electric sparks that kept coming out made Su Xinxing worried that this thing would be scrapped at any time after emitting a large amount of white smoke. Oh, that's great. Hearing that they could go home, even Su Xinxing couldn't help but be a little happy. But because of the rules of the Space Administration, I can't let the Deacon ship land directly in that world. So, I can only use the door link to let you return to that world through a specific door. Lux added. No problem, I'll wake them up. Su Xinxing nodded. Qin Xingyan and Chihaya Fukuyama found a cabin on the spaceship to sleep after the four-element giant whale was dealt with and heard from Lux that it would take a long time to return to Earth. Su Xinxing expressed his understanding. After all, in order to find him, the girls had almost non-stop experienced a different world war and high-dimensional monsters. It was normal for them to be mentally tired. Even Emily found a corner on the bridge and curled up to sleep. The reason why he didn't go to the guest room was because he had been separated from Su Xinxing for too long. Now, he needed to stay by Su Xinxing's side as much as possible to replenish his mana. Speaking of which, aren't you tired wearing this suit all the time? While reporting Emily from the corner, Su Xinxing couldn't help but ask Lux, who was dressed like an astronaut, isn't the spaceship's air system repaired? I'm just a bit used to it. Lux smiled bitterly and then pressed a few buttons on his wrist. The heavy suit on his body split open from the middle like a butterfly's cocoon, exposing Lux's original appearance to the air. It was a figure with long crimson hair, a tall and slender figure, and a pair of snow-white wings on his back. Holy shit, an angel? Lux. You're a girl? Su Xinxing couldn't help but swear. A girl? Lux tilted his head and then checked on the pad before answering Su Xinxing. No, according to the system encyclopedia, the people on my planet should be hermaphrodites. The people of another world were really scary. Chapter 234. We're finally back. Because Lux's spaceship was too noisy, and the engine was only repaired in an emergency manner, it was estimated that once it was forced to land, it would not be able to fly again. So, it was parked at the edge of the world barrier. Su Xinxing and the others borrowed the spaceship's lifeboat to return to Earth. After Lux drove the spaceship back to the Space Administration for repairs, they would come back to retrieve the shuttle. It was worth mentioning that although Lux's landing craft looked like a silver pumpkin, it was equipped with an optical camouflage module. Su Xinxing used about half an hour to learn how to operate this thing, and now there was an ordinary-looking van on the streets of Jiangjin. If one looked closely, one would find that the van did not have a manufacturer's logo, nor was there an annual inspection certificate. Even the license plate was a little blurry, and because Su Xinxing did not know much about the van, some parts of it gave people a sense of incongruity. But this was normal. After all, Su Xinxing was not an art major. Even if he had vehicle modeling in another world, the style of the various free materials in the fool's bag was different from those on Earth. To be able to make it like this was already a sign of Su Xinxing's talent. After returning to Earth, Chihaya Fukuyama could not help but open the window and take a big breath. Then her face changed and she coughed. Well, the mushroom planet. I mean, the composition of the atmosphere of the red planet was different from that of Earth, so let's not talk about it for now. But because the Lattice world was still in an era similar to the Middle Ages, and many magic factions advocated to be close to and protect nature, the air quality was much better than that of Earth's various oxygen bars, forests, and national parks. As soon as she returned to Earth and inhaled a mouthful of smog, Chihaya Fukuyama choked and coughed. Stop fooling around and close the window. There's no optical camouflage inside the shuttle. Anyone who sees the miniaturized photon furnace inside will feel weird. Do you think there's an aurora coming out of a van? Su Xinxing, who was sitting in the pilot's seat, said. Although this shuttle had an autopilot function, it was still an otherworldly product from the Space Administration. Su Xinxing guessed that it probably did not understand the traffic laws of the Celestial Empire. Running red lights was a small matter, but if it attracted the attention of the relevant authorities, he would have to spend a lot of effort to deal with it. In comparison, it was better for him to drive manually. Fortunately, Su Xinxing's buff included the Hero's buff, which allowed him to skillfully drive most vehicles. Otherwise, it would not have been so easy to learn how to use it in a short period of time. Driving the shuttle like a nimble cat, Su Xinxing overtook an old woman who rushed out from the side of the road and pretended to be knocked to the ground, intending to scam him. He did not care about the old woman's face when she saw a broken van jump over her head like a living creature. He just minded his own business and told Chihaya Fukuyama, supernatural beings like us who hide in the city have to pay attention to our daily lives as much as possible. Don't casually reveal any clues to be discovered by ordinary people, crap, there are so many things I want to complain about that I don't know where to start. Chizeo Shinshan covered her face and said in a tone of stomachache with black lines on her forehead. Speaking of which, there are a lot of things to do after coming back. Su Xinxing sighed and felt sad for the busy days he was about to experience. First, I have to find Xiao Jingyi and ask him to use his connections with the super administration to find an excuse for an exchange study to inform Yi Qing's parents. I also have to find an opportunity to put the river moon back in the museum. If the curator finds out that the river moon in the museum is fake, he will vomit blood. Also, there's the soul-cutting surgery for the apricot family. Oh right, Xinyan, didn't you go to borrow the artifact that can cut souls? What's the result? Su Xinxing turned around and asked Qin Xinyan. Aha, I borrowed it. Qin Xinyan nodded. He didn't explain how much effort he spent to borrow the artifact, and how he even used Xiong Qi's teeth as collateral. He just replied calmly, it's from a hidden sect called by Luo Ting. They specialize in the Tao of ghosts and have a unique understanding of souls. Also, the sect has a very long history. In terms of history, it's comparable to our Bailu temple. Thank you for your hard work. Even so, Su Xinxing wasn't the kind of person who didn't care about worldly affairs and didn't take other people's efforts for granted. Naturally, he knew that a hidden sect wouldn't give away an artifact that could be used as a sect treasure to an outsider for no reason. Therefore, he was quite grateful for Qin Xinyan's efforts. Since it's something I promised you, I will do my best to fulfill it. Qin Xinyan smiled and replied softly. Mr. Landlord, I'm hungry. Su Xinxing wanted to say something, but he was interrupted by Mo Li who suddenly interjected. Therefore, he was happy. He turned around and narrowly avoided an overloaded truck while saying loudly, Okay, let's go home and eat first. After letting the girls in the car experience the thrilling scenes of car racing in various movies, the group finally returned to the Sakura apartments that they had been away from for a long time. Well, actually, it hadn't been that long. After opening the door with the key, Su Xinxing showed a relaxed smile. He was finally home, and this time he was in human form. It wasn't easy, however, as if someone didn't want him to live a peaceful life. Just as Su Xinxing put on the apron and was about to go to the kitchen to cook, Qin Xinyan hurriedly came to find him. Senior, the artifact is gone. What? Su Xinxing was stunned. Before he could react, Chihaya Fukuyama and Mo Li also came over. Mr. Su Xinxing, it seems that there's a thief in the house. Some of the souvenirs I brought from Japan are gone. Mr. Landlord, my PS4 and PSVR are missing. Emily also said. That's strange. Sakura apartment has a holy barrier. Logically speaking, no thief should be able to enter. No, wait a minute. Su Xingsing took a deep breath and looked at Emily with a straight face. Where did you get the game console? You even bought a PSVR? Whoosh whoosh whoosh. As usual, Emily covered his head with both hands and looked at the ceiling. He whistled tunelessly, trying to get away with it. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.